The topic for our today's lecture is what every Indian should know about Bharatiya civilization. It is an absolute privilege to introduce our esteemed speaker for today, Dr. Rajvedam ji. Dr. Rajvedam holds a master's degree in electrical engineering from the prestigious Indian Institute of Science, Bengaluru, and completed his doctoral studies in electrical engineering at Oregon State University in Corvallis, USA. With an impressive career spanning over 26 years, he has amassed extensive experience in the fields of power, electronic design automation, and the oil and gas industries. What truly distinguishes Dr. Vedam is his unwavering dedication to researching the origins of our modern mathematics, sciences, and technologies. His quest for knowledge has led him to explore the narratives of various civilizations, including the Greeks, Chinese, Arabs, and Egyptians, and the often overlooked lost civilizations such as Sumerians, Hittites, Mitannis, Assyrians, and the Babylonians. As per the current historical narratives, the origin of mathematics and science are attributed to these civilizations. Dr. Vedam's rigorous investigation into these civilizations, coupled with a comparative analysis of ancient Indian civilization, has resulted in a compelling thesis supported by variable facts. He challenges the conventional timeline of Indian civilization and sheds light on numerous discoveries made by ancient Indians in science, mathematics, and technology that haven't been adequately attributed to them. The foundation of his thesis rests upon a wealth of supporting evidence drawn from various scientific disciplines, all meticulously documented and published in reputable scientific literatures and journals. But Dr. Rajvedam is more than just a scholar. He is a relentless seeker of truth on a profound journey to uncover the genuine history not only of India but of the entire human race. His research transcends boundary, touching the very core of humanity's shared history. Thus, with a warm welcome, I invite Dr. Rajvedam to the podium to illuminate us all with his deep, profound research and knowledge.
In line with the title, What Every Bharatiya Should Know About the Bharatiya Civilization, it's a series of talks that I've planned. And among them is this theme that I plan to address today, India and Europe over the ages. Most of us have learned that there's only one connection with Europe, that is colonialization. After colonialization, something has happened. But many of us are unaware of the deep impact that India has had on Europe for a very, very long period of time. So I'll bring out some of those facts in this talk today. So there's a prelude. We don't talk about the elephant in the room, right? We have a situation where narratives in Indian history are vitiated due to racism, Western universalism, demonization of the other as pagans, heathens, colonialization, ethnocide, a whole lot of issues are there which vitiate the whole problem. So I often preface my talks by talking about the frameworks that have been imposed on historiography of India. Very important for us to understand this because when we look at the history of India presented in NCERT textbooks or in popular media or in maybe even government directives and so on, the question to ask is, what are we really reading as far as the history of India is concerned? We can see that the colonial people were the first who wanted to write a history of India for the benefit of their civil servants. They presented India as a primitive, backward, superstitious society, and the Western Europe as a forward, progressive, technologically advanced society. So they came with a bunch of distortions right then and there. The Eurocentric people who wanted to figure out why are Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek related, so they came about with certain ideas that tried to show the superiority of the white Christians over the other pagan natives and others. So they came with their own biases. Then wherever the colonials were, the missionaries were not far behind, and they worked to translate some of our texts like the Puranas and Itihasas and others. They were at the forefront of translating them into English, German, and these were motivated translations. These were not translations that have been done in the best possible way. Since 1947, we've also got a socialist academia bias in the country. So I will describe this a little later. And since 1972, we got the Marxist bias also. So we have a combination of all of these frameworks who have hijacked the history of India, imposed their ideologies, and led to a subversion of our identity in the present. So today there is not a single Indian, perhaps anywhere, who can connect with to the ancient past and say, "This is who I am. This is my identity. I'm an inheritor of this glorious civilization." Nobody can perhaps say that because we have all been disconnected from our past, from our heritage, from our identity, thanks to these frameworks who have tried to isolate us from our systems. So these happened over the last 300 years. We have had colonial scholars, people like the Portuguese, Dutch, French, British, and what I call colonial hegemony, working with Christian imperialism with Caldwell, Pope, and others, Abbe Dubois and others, and with Eurocentric scholars, Max Muller, Herbert Risley, William Jones, and others. So they came about with several notions. For example, with Christian imperialism came the idea that Hinduism is a post-flood religion. The flood we're talking about is Noah's flood, because at that time they believed in the Bible's creation dates. So, and they believed that there is something called caste in India. We only had Jati, Varna, Kulam, Gotra. The Jati, Varna, Kulam, Gotra system was subverted into something called caste by them, and they presented us as a caste-ridden, oppressive society. Dravidians are supposed to be oppressed people, and this man over here even brought about the idea that Brahminical Aryans are evil, a notion that exists to the present day. The identification of Sandrakutos with Chandragupta Maurya, that resulted in a lot of distortion in our chronology. We had a Purana chronology going to a great past. Unfortunately, when the British came, they could not figure out where does this chronology match with the Western chronology. But they had somebody called Megasthenes who had visited India in 300 BCE, and he referred to somebody called Sandrakutos in his work called Indica. So William Jones made a phonetic connection that the Sandrakutos is the same as Chandragupta Maurya by looking at the Purana king list. The only problem is, in our chronology, Mauryas come to approximately 1200 BCE. So great amounts of distortion of our chronology was done because of things like that. And several other issues came about. But bottom line, with convergent ideologies of these forces, there has resulted today something called as Aryan invasion migration theory that constrains a whole lot of things on us. Then we have had also the left-leaning socialist academia, the Marxist academia. So this is a received wisdom for our scholars today. Whatever the colonialists said, they don't question it. It comes unquestioningly, all of these things. Additionally, that there are two language families in India, the notion of caste, oppressor, oppressed kind of thinking. Everything has come today because of this outsider sociology. They work with archaeology today and with genetics directly, once again, the impact of the Bharatiya identity, who we are. They work with circular dependencies and questionable notions. So we have got this frameworks imposed on the history of India, the colonial, Eurocentric, missionary, socialist, Marxist. And over here, the driving motivation was Christianity is the only true religion, superior to the white Europeans. For these two, by destroying the old order, you can get a classless utopia. In India, the old order was Hinduism. So by destroying that, you can get a classless utopia. That drives their motivation. In the meantime, they all have similar interests over here, upholding the Bible chronology, showing Hindus as primitive, backward, superior to white Europeans, promoting Christianity, subaltern studies, oppressor, oppressed conflict dynamics, class conflicts, claiming victimhood, and all of these kind of things. But we are caught in the crossfire. Our identity has been utterly perverted by these people, and we don't recognize who we are. In their narrations of who we are and our ancestors are, we can't recognize ourselves over here. So the problem is because they have imposed a whole lot of things on who we are. Why do we care about this? In a talk on history, why do we even care about this? Well, the false narrative that Aryans invaded India from Central Asia in 1500 BCE, they were nomads who did not even have a script, right? They only had an oral tradition, so they were illiterate people. And they destroyed the superior civilization of Harappa. India had to wait for 1000 years for civilization to return to Magadha after Magadha made contact with the Greeks. This is not my line. This is straight from NCERT textbooks. That's what it says. So when Magadha made contact with the Greeks, suddenly we got the Brahmi script, we got Ashokan edicts and other things, and we became civilized overnight in 300 BCE. Then they say, you have not had enough time for knowledge gestation and generation in mathematics, astronomy, medicine. So if you have advanced knowledge like Surya Siddhanta, Shushruta Samhita, and things like that, you must have learned it from the earlier civilizations, people like the Babylonians, Greeks, and so on. That is the way they position all of these things. So in this cartoonish image, We have the Aryans from Central Asia who brought Sanskrit into India. We have Brahmi, the script that came from Aramaic, a Semitic script from the Levant into India. Astronomy came from the Babylonians into India. The Greeks taught us math and sciences. Turkic Muslims got us culture, cuisine, architecture, music, and civilization. The British got us science, technology, and rational thought. And Bhakti was taught to us by Saint Thomas, who landed in Muziris. So these are the kind of things that are there to the present day. And what we see is there's a denial of agency in history. We don't have the adhikara to write our own history. And if we were to go and suggest that this has to be changed, we are pigeonholed as fascists or Hindutva or whatever nonsense you have you. But this has led to a gross distortion of the identity of Indians and a growing divisive forces based on spurious ideologies. I call it a criminal distortion of the history of the Indian civilization. That is what is going on in our textbooks today. Very, very unfortunate. With that as background, I'd like to now address a central topic. And the central topic is, what is it about Europe and India? Many people think that the only connections we have had is in the last 300 years or 400 years, or maximum 500 years with the Portuguese. So, what is it with the ancient connections between Europe and India? I've taken several slices. I call this a genetic slice first, looking 50,000 years ago to 3,000 years ago. Very bombastic date over there. But before I do that, just a reality check. On Google Maps, if you see the road from Cape Town to this place in Siberia, and if you want to go by walking, it says you can walk this in 4,400 hours or so, approximately 2 hours. Sorry, 2 years. So it's not impossible, even in those days, for people to migrate from one point to another. Within a few years, you'd be in a distant part of the world. So we got to keep this in mind. There were no visas, passports, and things like that in those days. So people would move around. So there's a prelude to think about this. So to talk about how the world was populated since the modern Homo sapiens, there's a theory now from the mtDNA research, and this is Stephen Oppenheimer's work, where he suggests that, rather on the basis of research, they suggest that Homo sapien came around 150,000 years ago in Africa, and 85,000 to 75,000 years ago, a group of people left Africa, crossed over the triangular part of India, all the way up to Sumatra, Taiwan, and other places. They did not go this way because there was one more species called Neanderthals living there. The early Homo sapien was about 4 feet tall, 5 feet tall, about 50 kgs, 40 kgs. The Neanderthal was bigger. They didn't want to confront the Neanderthals, so they hit the coast and walked this route. And about 74,000 years ago, there was a super volcano in Sumatra, not an ordinary volcano, but a super volcano. This resulted in volcanic ash up to 5 meters deep, covering India and Pakistan. So much of particulate matter was put into the atmosphere that we experienced a nuclear winter and for almost 1,000-year instant ice age. It also resulted in a dramatic population crash. Less than 10,000 adults would have survived this event. You and I are present in this room because one of our ancestors was part of this 10,000, if this theory is right. It's a sobering thought for you. So this one over here shows in Jwalapuram near Kurnool. Even today, we can find remnants of this ash layer. The researcher Ravi Korisetter, he is conducting digs over here. So under the ash layer, he has found human artifacts. Then the ash layer, then above the ash layer, we got human artifacts, meaning that humans were living in India prior to this eruption, and after the eruption, they continued to live over there. Very interesting to see that. Then around 74 to 65,000 years ago, a repopulation of India took place. 65,000 years ago, ice ages ended in Europe, coinciding with the dying out of the Neanderthal. And that vacuum was filled by humans from this part of the world, India basically, crossing the Bosphorus and becoming the future proto-Europeans. And on this side, the migrations have reached up to Australia. And about 45,000 years ago, groups of people from this part of India, Sumeria, they're all joining and moving towards Central Asia and crossing Siberia and becoming the future North and South Americans. So this is, in brief, how we talk about the population of the world using the maternal mitochondrial DNA. This is what we learn about this. From as early as 25,000 years ago, I'm jumping my story now to approximately 20,000 years ago, what we call the Mesolithic era. This is about 20,000 years ago. This shows you the temperature of the Earth, the mean temperature of the Earth at various periods in time. This is millions of years. 500 million years ago, the Earth was a very hot place. Maybe we couldn't have lived over there. But then the cooling has taken place 1 billion years ago, and this is now in thousands of years. 20,000 years ago, this is where we were. We had an ice age over here called the late glacial maximum. So we need to figure out what was the Earth like during the last glacial maximum. Where could there have been human activity and where could life have been difficult? That's what we want to learn over here. And if we look at the global climate ages, we see that India was more or less a tropical grassland. That's what India was. And we had this tropical woodland over here. But all of Europe was tundra, basically tundra or dry desert land. So there wouldn't have been much activity as such over here 22,000 years ago. Most of the activity would have been towards India. So it would have been a source population for many activities that would follow after the last glacial maximum. We know that after the last glacial maximum is when the Neolithic era comes. Neolithic meaning invention of agriculture. So let's go there step by step. So if we see who the Europeans are today, their genetic lineage is tied to something called Caucasus hunter-gatherer, Eastern farmer, or Western hunter-gatherer. So typically, we see that man starts off as a hunter-gatherer. Then maybe after some time, we domesticate a sheep or a cow or something. So we become herders. Eventually, after becoming a herder, you become a farmer. So this is a kind of a transition that we see. And these are the names you see. Early man was the Caucasus hunter-gatherer, then the Eastern farmer, and the Western hunter-gatherer. So this is a map that shows 50,000 years ago, they had a common ancestor. Then they break down over here into this Caucasus hunter-gatherer, the Eastern farmer, and the Western hunter-gatherer. This is who the model is for who the Europeans are. So the ancient European genetic lineages 20,000 to 6,000 years ago are the Western hunter-gatherer, the Eastern hunter-gatherer, Western Siberian hunter-gatherer, ancient North Eurasians, and this ancient North Siberians. This is the kind of lineages over here with the interactions between them. What we see in the Western hunter-gatherer is 20,000 to 10,000 years ago, they had dark skin. They had dark skin. In fact, this specimen here was a reconstruction called the Cheddar Man. If you search in Google for the Cheddar Man, you'll find that in Britain, they recovered this particular artifact and they did a lot of analysis saying that he probably had blue eyes, dark skin, kinky hair, and other such things. This is the specimen in Western hunter-gatherer in that time frame. And we know that in the eastern side, that is where a certain allele is a mutation that gave light skin. That came about 30,000 years ago, somewhere near Iran and India. 30,000 years ago, we had a mutation. It's called SLC A425, if I'm not mistaken. That is a number that you see over here. I can't read it from here. But this light skin started mixing over here. Additionally, in this part of the world, there's also a mutation for the blonde hair. So that was also given the Tarim Basin mummies as well as coming in over here. So the modern European who is fair-skinned with blonde hair is a mix of several different genetic pieces, as you can see from here. Then our next interest is about agriculture, Neolithic, right? So we want to see how did farming even come to Europe between 9,600 to 4,000 BCE. So here this paper says that somewhere in Anatolia we had the earliest farming and spread to different parts of Europe in this time frame. But then they also made a wrong projection saying that it also spread to the east coming into India over here. And I put question marks over here because some of the latest research with the Cell paper on Harappa genome shows out of India rather than this going into India in this time frame. What I mean is this paper, this came about a couple of years back by Vasant Shinde and Neeraj Rai. So they managed to get the genome from the Harappa skeleton. It was analyzed in South Korea, and they came with the notion that there is an Indus Valley clan with some component from Andamanese hunter-gatherer and a common ancestor going back to far ancient times, much before 10,000 BCE. Then when they talked about the Iranian hunter-gatherer, remember Iranian hunter-gatherer, Iranian herder, Iranian farmer. That is the way it goes in time. So the early Iranian hunter-gatherer lived around 10,000 BCE. The color is entirely orange, as you can see here. So it's 100% this orange thing. Then going to Iranian herder, also 100% over here in this time frame. And by the time you come to Iranian farmer, 4000 BCE, you have a component from Anatolia and you have a component from India. This is what you're saying. So this picture is actually telling us that there's a movement out of India. In the Neolithic time, with agriculture, there's a movement out of India. That is what we learn from here. And if you compare this over here, this is clearly wrong. In this part, it's actually from here it goes, and the rest of this can continue as before. So that is the lesson we learn from this. And this is a very famous thing also, the mouse migration. This is a paper that is there in Genome Biology in 2007, where the researcher wanted to show the ancestor of the common house mice. And he says that, to his surprise, the genetic ancestor of the common house mice turns out to be in India. It is from India that it goes to Madagascar, North Africa, Europe, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and so on. Why is that relevant for us? Because if you store paddy in a place, mice are going to come. And as you take the technology along, settling in various parts of the world, mice are going to follow you. So even from mouse genomics, we have indirectly an inference that it is out of India that migrations have happened along with agriculture in this particular time frame. This is a paper that came out in 2022 in Nature. This looked at millets. They wanted to see how did certain things like millets appear in Mesopotamian area. So in this color coding, this yellow is 3rd millennium BCE, red is 1st millennium BCE. And so it turns out that these are all red, meaning they came recently over here. Some of the oldest millets was in India. So it is from India that through the trade route, it has gone to the Persian Gulf, and these things are gone over into this region. What it is telling us is that even agriculture has moved out of India and landed up in Mesopotamia and other places. Clear evidence. You take all these things together and you're piecing together a bigger picture. Now, claim there is a claim that in the linguistics, it says that the reason why languages are related is there was an ancestral language called Proto-Indo-European spoken by people between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. That's called PIE, Proto-Indo-European. And they say they domesticated the wild horse and they also got iron swords. Therefore, they're in a position to dominate people. And they spread to the east by 2500 BC to the west and to the east, becoming Andronovo people here and Corded people over here. By 1500 BC, they've entered into India through Bactria margiana archaeological complex. By 500 BC, they're spread over the Ganga plain, and you see Dravidians appear here. So this is what we are learning even today when we talk about Aryan invasion, right? According to this theory, the earliest language out of Proto-Indo-European went to Balto-Slavic around 2500 BCE. And the later one came to India in 1500 BCE. This is the Indo-Iranian, Indo-European language over here. So linguistics is claiming a late dispersal of Indo-Iranian from Caucasus region. The Kurgan hypothesis also claims similarly using horse, chariot, and archaeology. Even certain genetics people are making claims there's a similar movement from Caucasus to India. So the question to ask is Caucasus the link between Indians and Europeans? And very surprisingly, the answer is no. This is a paper that just came out a couple of months back in 2023 by a researcher called Hegarty in Science. So what he did is a deep mathematical study. So he said, I'm going to do a Bayesian phylogenetic study, which on the origin of Indo-European languages. Basically what it means is, if I have, maybe I take 3 languages. I take Kannada, I take Tamil, I take Telugu. The word for milk is pal in Tamil. Milk is palu in Telugu. Milk is halu in Kannada. So the pa became ha, right? So the syllable has changed from one to the other. So linguistics tries to study the morphology of the sound. Where is the sound made? Is it made in the front of the mouth, middle of the mouth, back of the mouth? When I say ta, my tongue rolls backwards and hits my jaw. When I say ta, my tongue hits against the back of my teeth. When I say pa, lips come together. So this is called morphology of the sound. Where is the sound made? So linguists try to study how is the sound made. How does one a syllable change from one to the other, statistically they assume it happens at a certain rate. And that is why we got this Bayesian phylogenetics. So what they do is they start from the modern languages that we have, with a modern maybe 100 words in these modern languages. Then statistically they start changing the vowels, the sound, how it is made, going backwards in time. And they try to see at what point do they converge. Converging means working backwards at converging. That will tell you where was a common ancestral language that far back in time, mathematically at least. So this paper came and said the Indic and Iranian have a common ancestor going back 7,000 years before present. This is completely against what linguists have been trying to tell us. Linguistics are saying that Iranian and Sanskrit split about 1500 BCE. But this is saying the common ancestor must go back to 7,500. You can see the common ancestors here. This is Indian, Iranian, common ancestors somewhere over here. Similarly, what are they saying? They're saying in the Aryan invasion or whatever hypothesis, this Indo-European was the last of two main branches to emerge out of a finer major clade of Balto-Slavic. Our results contradict this both in chronology and tree topology. They also say that recent ancestral DNA data from Central and South Asia have sought to trace movement of people into Western and South Asia by migration southward from the steppe. However, they do not see any such southward migration. So their bottom line is their results does not match linguistic analysis or ancestral DNA that has been published. Very, very strong result over here saying you're doing nonsense in linguistics, you're doing nonsense in ADNA, because this result does not seem to match the claims that you're making. That is the result of this paper. And there is one more very interesting paper that I found, the ability to digest milk. All of us as mammals can digest milk when we are babies, right? In general, we should lose that ability when we grow as adults, we lose the ability to digest milk. But if we can digest it, it's called lactase persistence. It turns out that lactase persistence is there in Europeans and Indians because we have a certain mutation. That mutation allows us to digest milk even into adulthood. But the issue is, while Indians and Europeans have lactase persistence because of this particular allele over here, this one over here, Central Asians don't have that. So if Central Asians were the source population for Europeans and Indians, clearly something's wrong even in this picture. So I've given you two or three indications over here that calls into question. Then one more result from paleobotany. Many people are unaware that grapes was grown in India for a very, very long time. In our history textbooks, we learn that it came to India in 13th century by some Muslim who came from Iran, introduced grapes into India. That is what we are told. But then there's a fossil over here, the earliest grape family, the Vitaceae, 66 million years ago. This is in a museum in the United States. So we have several references to grapes and drinking and intoxication in India. Whether Manu, for example, he laid down strict rules to prevent drinking, meaning that even when Manusmriti was written, there were already people who were drunkards drinking wine and things like that, and he's got rules for that. Itihasas are talking about that, and so on. And there are other side also. People have suggested, what is this Rig Veda Soma? Is it some plants like mushrooms? Is it some stimulant like ephedra? Or is it grape wine? There are people who are suggesting it could be grape wine. Even Strabo, the Greek, he's saying the Indians do not drink wine except at sacrifices, meaning that the practice of drinking wine was there. Why am I saying that? Because this is a study that came out just now, October 2023, that is talking about where did the ancestor of the European grape come from. So grapes over here, this picture over here, has got a wild origin at a very distant past. We know perhaps India is a place. Then we have the western group and we have the eastern group growing wild. Then approximately around 10,000 years before present, the eastern group starts crossing over, which means with agriculture and movement of people from the east, they're taking the grape culture and making further and further new grapes over here. And most of the Western wines are based upon some of these kind of things. Why is that relevant again? That's relevant because this is one more data point saying agriculture is going from the east going towards the west. So everything that I'm showing to you here, you might find it confusing. Why am I showing all these different data points? The point is because they all are indicating the agriculture also is moving out of India into Europe. So the question is, Is Central Asia the source population for Balto-Slavic and Iran, India? I say this is wrong. India is probably the source population for Europe as well as Central Asia, which could have added some into Europe in addition. So this is probably the better model to apply for India. And Conrad Ernst, at least, has got an out of India model where he posits that 5000 BC or 7000 years ago, Indians lived in this part, moving out in 5000 BC, 4500 BC, and this part after 2000 BC. This is a model that is given. A few changes might have to be done in light of what we have found, but for the most part, it seems to be right. Very improbably, we can say that even the earliest religion probably came from India going into other parts of the world, maybe as early as 50,000 to 25,000 years ago. You might think I'm a crank given these kind of dates that I'm giving here. You might wonder what on earth. Well, if you take a look at shamans, I say that India would have been the first place outside Africa where resources, climate, safety would have provided equilibrium. With a full belly, people ask, who are we? What is our purpose in the world? That is possible only in India, maybe not elsewhere. And we see that shamans come from the Pali word shamana, basically. It's a technique of religious ecstasy where the intermediaries between the human and spirit world, they beat drums, they dance, they smoke, get into trance-like state, and they mend spiritual imbalances, reverence for nature, trees, animals, sky, ancestor worship, and they're precursor of Tantra, Shaktism, and so on. The common practices, to me, it implies a common origin. What do I mean by that? To start with, where is the material evidence that such a shaman practice was there in an ancient period of time? This is from archaeological site in Czechoslovakia 30,000 years ago. If you remember my genetic migrations, 30,000 years ago, people from India were going and settling in Bosphorus, where Czechoslovakia is. In there, in Pavlov Hills, in this particular book, they recount there was a skeleton found with red ochre and a body of a fox is in one hand, showing it was a shaman. Additionally, there were a lot of pieces of baked clay, some ritual kind of thing, like talisman and other such things. Clearly, this is a shaman. So we are seeing that the practice of shamanism has started right there. Czechoslovakia is our earliest archaeological specimen. And if you continue looking, we got shamans in Mongolia, for example. We got shamans in India, where we call them tantrics. You got in Indonesia, you got in Japan, Korea, and the Hmong people in China, Laos, Vietnam. Observe the drum. Almost every one of them are beating a drum, right? They got drumming, singing, dancing. These are all common to all these people. Russia, again, the beating of the drum and another shaman practice in Russia. Siberia and Alaska, once again, we're seeing beating of drums. And in Native America, Blackfoot, Dakota Sioux, Kickapoo, and others, similar kind of things. All the way to South America, Ecuador, Brazil, Chile, observe the drums. So we are seeing a common shaman practice all over the world. And the question is, did they all evolve independently or did they have a common origin? And my position is yes, they had a common origin. Otherwise, it could not be the same all over the world. And that common origin, if it happened, should be in India. Because we know through genetic migrations 30,000 years ago, people are moving out. We know that. So probably early religion in India was at least 30,000 years old. And this is in Central America. It looks very similar to Shiva that I thought, beating of a drum with snakes and other things. Famous Pashupati seal that we have, and others. And Shiva obviously is known for that. Then I look at the archaeology slice. India and Europe from 20,000 years to 5,000 years ago. Is there any commonality we can find? Surprisingly, there are so many things that you can find that are common. All over India, we got megaliths, maize, menhirs, dolmens. For example, Andhra Pradesh, you got the stone circles over here. Koppal, Karnataka, we got the dolmens over here. Labyrinth in Dharmapuri, menhir in Erode, Arunachal Pradesh, in Pakistan, in Mayur, one so dolmen. So very similar architecture is there. In our country, they put them to a date of about 2000 BCE. How they got those dates, I have no idea. But what I want to show you here is that this menhir is a common worldwide culture. Whether you go to Germany, Wales, or Ireland, France, Brittany, Sardinia, Eritrea, Manipur, India, Czechoslovakia, you find everywhere a similar culture. Whether it was a gravestone or a marker of a hero who's fallen in battle or whatever, we are finding a similar culture throughout the world. That is one. Dolmens, exactly the same. The same architecture that we're talking about is in Cornwall, UK. Cornwall, UK. This is in Kerala. This is in South Korea, France, Brittany, in Ireland, Germany, Sicily, Quebec, in Portugal, Netherlands. Take a look. This architecture is exactly the same. Exactly the same. So the question is, who are these people with a worldwide culture who are making these things? Our people are saying it's around 2000 BCE, but I strongly suspect that I think it's far more ancient. It's a technology, once again, that had a common source. That common source probably was in India. And as Indian agriculturists went out of India, this technology has gone to other parts of the world. That can the only reason why it explains the shaman behavior as well as this archaeological behavior. Stone circles, the same thing. In Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, you have this one, very ancient ones. Golan Heights in Senegal, in famous Stonehenge in England, and you find in Telangana and various other places, we find stone circles. Could be some kind of an astronomical calendar marker, but again, similar technology is present worldwide, which opens a question once again. Are these because they're all related in some sense? So what am I doing here? I am taking to you different categories of data and I'm showing you evidence in different categories that is calling into question what kind of relationship did India have with Europe. I started out with genetics and I showed you some genetic connections. Then I went on to the shamans, I showed you the shaman kind of connections. Then I went to archaeology and I showed you some ancient stone megalith things. Now I'm coming to the divinity slice, the early divinity between 15,000 to 3,000 years ago. Incidentally, these are the Ashwin Kumaras in the Greek, in the Roman tradition. So there are a lot of commonalities between the divinities. For us, Agni, in Slavic, it is this Ignis in Latin and so on. And you have this Ashwin, which is these things over here. Bhaga, Dvis, Indra. Indra's got some names in various, in Mitanese, in Kassites, Celtic, in Maruts. They have also in different cultures. They also have similar kind of divinity over there. And Ushas, the goddess of dawn, whether it's in Greek, Roman, Aurora, Lithuanian, and others. Surya, same thing in different cultures. What we are seeing is there is a common divinity all over Europe. Old Europe and India seem to have similar divinities which are related to the Vedic divinities. That is what I want to highlight over here. The slaying of the serpent, this is a common element in all the Indo-European divinities. Indra slays this Vritra in Sanskrit. In Avestan, this Janath slays the serpent Azi. In the Hittites, this thing slays this beast. Slavic, Perun slays the dragon Velis. Very similar stories are there. Drink of immortality, Soma or Amrita, is the same as in Avestan or the Norse Mimir's well. The battle of the gods, Devas versus Asuras, Devas versus Angra Mainyu in Avestan, Olympian gods versus the Titans, the Asir versus the Vanir. So we are seeing a very similar culture even in the divinities. This is what I want to highlight over here. And in India, we have a very strange situation where some of our stories can be dated to very ancient periods of time. One such story is the Surya story. Surya apparently had a happy married life. One fine day, he became so brilliant that his wife could not take the heat. So Sanjana leaves her shadow Chaya in a place and she flees to the cooler regions. But then Surya discovers a deception and asks Chaya, "Where's my wife?" And she says she's gone to the cooler regions. So he goes off to the cooler regions and he finds she's taken the form of a horse. So their union gives rise to the Ashwini Kumaras. There are several things to infer from that, and Balagangadhar Tilak, he called it out. He said, this is an archaeo-astronomical phenomena where if the sun has gone to a cooler region, that means it's gone to winter solstice position because it's winter in the northern hemisphere, and Ashwini Kumaras are born. We have a Rig Vedic passage that said, Ushas, awaken the Ashwinis for their share of the Vedic sacrifice in this particular Rig Vedic verse 8.9.17. So Ushas is a goddess of dawn, right? You don't awaken adults. She's awakening the babies, Ashwinis, and saying, awaken. So it's telling us that when the sun was in winter solstice position, the nakshatra, the longitude should have been Ashwini nakshatra. That is what it is referencing to. So we can crank it back in the planetarium software. We determine the date to be 7200 BCE. And I found a fascinating correlation with these two scientific papers that talk about a solar storm 9,000 years before present, which is or 7176 BCE. Independent collaboration of the astronomy based on text and on ice core samples from Greenland and from Antarctica that both talk about the same thing. So, what is the point? In India, we clearly have a story of Surya, Ashwinis, Ushas, which is a Rigvedic quantities, common in India and all the European divinities. But the story in India is 7,200 years old. So it's not a story that came from outside into India, rather the story endemic to India, it has gone out of India. That's what it is telling us over here. We have the famous Mitra panel of the 100 current era. Some of you will look at this and be amazed because there is so much of symbolism. The Shivalinga over here, the snake, and many other things like Shiva and Parvati looking at this. And here is this man killing a bull. And you see the dog star Sirius over here. You find the scorpion also over here. These are all deeply astronomical phenomena. I have called this out in earlier talks. I'm not going to read all of these things. It's the killing of the Vrishpa, the bull, and this is about 4000 BCE, the passage of time. When the calendar has gone on from this Mrigashirsha, it has moved on to the next nakshatra. That is what it is referring to, and this story is talking about that. And we have got other references to bull killing. For example, this Indus seals also we see this kind of the same phenomena coming to around 3000 BC, 4000 BC to 3000 BC. That is the time frame for this. And amazingly, we see that in the Roman panels also, showing a common culture. This many people find fascinating. The Celts are the ancient people who were there in Europe, and they seem to have a story that's so similar to the Ramayana. For example, if you see the Ramayana, Rama's virtuous, compassionate, wise, the hero over there is Fionn McCool, is virtuous, wise, compassionate. Rama's father's under a curse that he'll die when his son moves away from him. Fionn is born after his father dies. As a teen, Rama learns warcraft under Vashishta and Vishwamitra in a forest hermitage. Fionn studies under a couple of rishis over there in the forest over here, warcraft in the forest. As a teen, he kills the Ashuras, and Fionn, he also, as a 10-year-old, destroys a dragon over here. Rama's wife Sita, she desires a shape shifting golden deer when in exile and she's abducted. Rama spends years searching for her. Fionn's wife is transformed to a deer by an angry druid, and Fionn spends years searching for her. Ramasetu, a bridge built by Rama to battle the villain. Fionn builds a causeway to battle. This is a causeway in Ireland to go and battle with a giant. We have the four major ages in cyclical time, Chaturyuga. Celts too have the four major ages in cyclical time. What I'm pointing out over here is not a surprise, perhaps, that there is deep influence of Indic thought even among the Celts. This is not the only one. Even the Pitrupaksha that we have, right? So this is related to the Samhain. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. Samhain of the Celts. So we have the southern course of the sun, Dakshinayana, path of the Pitrus, between June 21st to December 21st, with equinox on September 22nd. Pitru Paksha is observed soon after September 22nd on the new moon called this Mahalaya Amavasya, offerings to ancestors. Celts observed this Samhain, a feast for ancestors, halfway between equinox, September 22nd, and December 21st solstice. Now it is normalized to October 31st. They left offerings for their ancestors. When it became Christian, it was termed pagan and was usurped in the 9th century and made on November 1st and 2nd as All Saints' Day, All Souls' Day, and they kept October 31st as Halloween. So Halloween really is a remembrance of Pitru Paksha in that particular civilization, which the Christians allowed them to have this kind of a non-religious function. In India, we are aware of the Rig Vedas, Dasaragnya. In Dasaragnya, we have got the Battle of 10 Kings, where these are all the tribes arrayed against Sudas. So Sudas wins the battle, and these tribes were induced upon to leave India. We know that because the Rig Vedic verse talks about that. There are several people who have tried to see who are these people in relation to the modern peoples that we know outside of India. I'll quote a couple of them. Srikant Thalagiri, he's done a lot of work on this, and he's calling out these various Indo-European tribes mentioned in Rig Veda and referring to the geographical locations where they are. For example, the Alan people, these are the Alna people in the Rig Veda, they are in South Russia. Similarly, the Hellen people, the Alina over here, they are in Greece. Things like this. So they try to identify phonetically with the language and so on who these tribes could be in the modern context. Another good friend of mine, Jijit Ravi, he wrote this book, Rivers of Rig Veda, where he tried to, using again works by Srikant Thalagiri and others, he tried to show when the Battle of Ten Kings happened, where did these people migrate to? The Hittites, the Greeks, the Albanians, the Italic, Celtic, Germanic, Baltic, Slavic, all these people seem to have spread out over here. And this explains why Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek are related because this kind of a migration has already taken place. Some artifacts to support this prehistoric contact. This is a paper that came out in Science in 2019. I've talked about this in the past. This is a familiar humped bull, the humped bull that you see in every Indian village. This is called Bos indicus, or it's also called zebu. The interesting thing is the occurrence of this particular animal went up in the Fertile Crescent. Fertile Crescent is a Nile River Valley, Tigris River Valley, Euphrates River Valley, where a lot of agriculture was there. Suddenly, 4,200 years ago, 4,200 BCE, the prevalence of this animal went up. That's what this study is talking about. And they say this happened when there was a 200-year drought in the Indus Valley. We know from climate studies that India suffered a 200-year monsoon failure in 2000 BCE. So when that happened, people must have migrated out. Like I'm saying, southern Indian rivers are fed by monsoons. If monsoon fails not 1 year, not 2 years, not 3 years, not 4 years, 200 years, southern India would have been a dust bowl. People could not perhaps have lived. It would have been that bad. And maybe northern India glaciers would have melted out and maybe there wouldn't have been enough water. So we have some evidence that Indians went out and settled in the Fertile Crescent. And this is talking about this. Very interesting to see this. This is from Ratnagiri in Maharashtra. You find the scarab over there, recently called out by Deccan College in Pune. And this is the same scarab on an Egyptian sarcophagus from 2000 BCE. This is 12,000 years old, this is 4,000 years old. But the iconography is unmistakable. This is something that came out on Twitter a couple of months back or so, where this person called this as an Egyptian acrobat on a 3,250-year-old limestone doing this kind of a pose. I said this is exactly this particular yoga asana position. Again, pointing out that there are certain things that have been imported out of India in various time frames, and this is one of them. Egyptian medicine, we know that most of the Egyptian medicine has only come after 1800 BC. The Kahun papyrus, Ebers papyrus, Smith papyrus, they came 1800 BC, 1500 BC, containing contents like magic, trauma surgery, gynecology, and so on, very similar to Atharva Veda. Atharva Veda is the source of our medical knowledge systems, and that too contains some preparations of these things. And if you can't cure something, there's a mantra also in Atharva Veda. So similarly, you find these kinds of things over here. This is a Britisher called J.F. Royle in 1837. He writes in this page 116 to 150 that many plants and materials from India were in use in Egypt, hinting that knowledge was being transferred from India to Egypt in this particular time frame. Not surprising to us because we know 2000 BCE, Indians have left India, taking their knowledge systems with them and spread it in these parts of the world. Then we have this instance of the Mitannis and the Hittites. So this is the Persian Gulf over here. This is Babylon, which is today's Baghdad and other such places. This is the Mitanni kingdom. Mitannis are where the Kurdish people are today. Hatti is where Turkey is today. So the amazing thing is the people here seem to have a Sanskritic culture. We have found several kinds of things that support that. This particular paper is talking about the Aryan gods of the Mitanni treaties. In the Mitannis, there was a ruler called Tushratha, very similar to Dasharatha, right? Ratha means a chariot. So they even have Sanskrit names in their names. Tushrata wrote a letter to the Egyptian pharaoh Amenhotep in 1350 BCE saying, in the name of Indra, in the name of Varuna, in the name of Ashwin twins, I promise not to attack you. The peace treaty, right? The peace treaties, they are invoking the names of Aryan gods. This is there in a cuneiform text in the Paris Museum. So that shows that. So clearly, we are seeing that culture from India is present in these lands. And we also know that the Greeks learned from the Hittites and the Egyptians. So going back to 1500 BCE, early Greeks have picked up a lot of knowledge from these people. We know that. This is a very interesting thing. In the Greek island of Crete, there is a Gnosis palace which they recovered, and they restored the frescoes on the walls, right? They restored that. When they restored that, they found to their surprise these blue monkey images. These are langur monkeys over there. This animal is endemic to India. What is it doing in Greece? And that too in this time frame, 1600 BCE, clearly pointing out that there's already trade, culture, intellectual exchanges between India as well as this ancient Greece in this very ancient period of time. There appears to be a connection between the Minoan culture and southern Indian culture. For example, even today we got the Jallikattu in Tamil Nadu. This is bull jumping that is there in the Minoan Gnosis Palace, Hittite ways, as well as this Gnosis Palace. You see the same kind of thing. So a similar cultural practice seems to be present in India even today. Then we got the griffin frescoes in Minoan art, eagle with a lion body. In Tibetan art and others, Garuda shown eagle with a man form. Then the Minotaur of the Minoans is a buffalo head, human body demon. Mahishasura for us is a buffalo body demon. And Theseus kills Minotaur in a labyrinth, helped by a princess who gives thread to escape the maze. In our context, Devi, she kills Mahishasura with weapons given by various divinities. And there's a labyrinths in Crete. I've shown to you labyrinths in southern India. Minoans practice cremation and burial. Indians too practice cremation and burial. And the empty DNA and genome-wide studies also seem to show a component of connection over here. I often say this, you take any Greek story, you give me any Greek story, I'll show you a corresponding Purana story. Exactly parallel Purana story. This is a story of the missing seventh sister. These are the Pleiades, virginal companions of the goddess called Artemis. Artemis is identified with Durga, for example. One day, the serial predator, Orion the hunter, he spots them when they are having a bathe or some, bathing in a pool or something like that. And he starts chasing them. And Artemis is furious. She goes to Zeus and says, protect my girls. But Zeus does not protect them. Eventually, she has him killed by a scorpion. This is actually a astronomical symbolism involved over here. I will not go there now. And Zeus makes Pleiades and Orion as stars in the sky. Now, the issue is the Greek tradition says there are seven sisters, but visibly we only see six stars. What happened to the seventh sister? She says the seventh sister was Merope, who had an affair with a mortal man. So, in shame, she hid her face. Because she hid her face, we can't see her. That's what it says. Would you believe we have a similar story in India? You might wonder, what on earth am I talking about? Is that Markandeya Purana? In Markandeya Purana, we have Agni who's officiating the Homa of the Saptarishis, and he looks around and sees the beautiful wives of the Saptarishis. All are beautiful women. And then he feels very ashamed of himself that he's attracted to married women, and he goes and does tapasya to overcome that weakness of his. But then in the meantime, he neglects his own companion Swaha, who's got unrequited love. She practices deception. She takes advantage of his weakness. She knows his weakness, right? She takes the form of the six wives of Saptarishi's wives and seduces Agni. But she could not take Arundhati's form because Arundhati's chastity is legendary, right? She could not do that. So the six-headed Kartikeya or Skanda was born. The forest dwellers who had seen all this illicit romance, they complained to the gods. But then the wives are pretty innocent. They've done nothing wrong, right? So they leave the Saptarishis in shame and they become the Kritikas, the six sisters. The seventh sister is Arundhati, who remains with her husband over here, Vashishta, in the Great Bear constellation, a twin star over here, Arundhati Vashishta. So very similar story with little twist over here and there in illicit romance, all those kinds of things. Like this, you take any Greek story, I'll show you a parallel with Indian story. And the question is, how are these things happening? This is the famous Gundestrup cauldron in Denmark, 200 BCE. On one of these panels, we find this. This is very familiar to us, right? This is from the Pashupati Sea in Mohenjo-daro. This is about 2400 BCE, and here you see the same horned figure, just like there's a horned figure, seated in some kind of an asana position with animals all around, just like Pashupati, right? Animals around. Some kind of similarities over here. So I'm going to different domains here, right? And so I'm going to the next domain on language. We can show connections from 10,000 to 5,000 years ago. So ever since William Jones found commonality of Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek, Europeans have been on a quest for the Western identity. Who are they as a people? They try to address that question. Eventually, that led to things like reconstructing this Proto Indo European language, a reconstructed hypothesized language, where they said from the homeland in Central Asia around 3000 BCE, one group of people went to Balto Slavic, the earliest branch, and then the latest branch, 1500 BC, was the Indo Iranians, Indic, Iranian, and so on. So, this is the outcome of the linguistic analysis that proposes such a kind of relationship. And how they did it is something called comparative linguistics. Once again, like I said, taking a bunch of languages, cognates in each language, they try to see which is close, which is far from each other with morphology, syntax, phonology, and others. But it is informal. It's an informal way of doing it, subjective, it lacks testability. Whole lot of things have been done, but the bottom line is I'd like to point out how they did it. Things like Grimm's law. They said, for example, if you have a sound called ba, that is an older form of the sound, like compared to ba, compared to pa, compared to fa. That is how the word is morphing from ba to pa to fa. And so they have a relationship between them. Your question should be, how did they get that relationship? That relationship was brought because they wanted a certain kind of antiquity in those languages. By looking at Balto Slavic is supposed to be the oldest, so by looking at how the words changed over there, they had to get these kind of laws to match that. And here is an example in a Proto-Indo-European, they would say something called pods, meaning is foot. Sanskrit is pada, for example. Or similarly, a whole lot of things. They say, what is the law? Pa becoming fa. So from some pada, it has become foot, right? So how did that change happen? They have a rule for that. One example is a SPI example for the wheel. This is a familiar bullock cart. It's also shown this wheel is there in Harappa. And you have words in Sanskrit, Latin, Greek, Hittite, Tokarpian for wheel, yoke, nave, hub, axle. And the proposed reconstruction is from PIE, there is a word they say called Quetlo. Everything with a star means it's a reconstructed word, it is not a real word. From this, we get the Proto Indo Iranian word called Kekro, again reconstructed. There's no evidence anybody spoke this. From this, you get the Sanskrit word called Chakra. This is a reconstruction. Irony of this one is the data to make this kind of a reconstruction was provided by Sanskrit. Sanskrit provided the data using which they reconstructed all of these things. Then they made that into the derivation into a fact. And they made Sanskrit into a derivation from these. So it's a circular reasoning, in other words. It's not a best way of handling this. Several people pointed out some inconsistencies in this model of migration based on a very simple idea. The word for 100 in Sanskrit is shatam or satam in Avestan. In Latin, it is centum. Centum is 100. So they assume that centum is European, but then we are seeing Tocharian, all this blue is Kentum, for example. Tocharian is there where north of India. What is that doing over there? And Hittite is in Asia. Satam was assumed to be Asian, but the Slavic, Baltic, Albanian are in Europe. Conrad L. Stevens says Proto-Bangani in the Himalayan region uses Koto for 100, which is a Kentum kind of language. So there is no clean separation saying that these people came from India, settled here, there was a Kentum group of languages, this is a Shatam group of languages. No such clean cut is there, so it fails the theory. And I've already shown you this, right, in an earlier section, this new paper that came out, 2023, saying that even if you take this Indic and Iranian and using mathematics of Bayesian phylogenetics, if you try to see the roots of these languages, it goes to 7,000 years before present and not 3,000 as linguistics would like you to believe. So there are big problems over here. Then moving on, India and Europe from 3000 to 1500 years ago, we can take a look at the knowledge slice now, Greeks and philosophy. So we know that there's contact even during the time of Darius. During the time of Darius, we know that there was an army in which Xerxes led against Greece in 480 BCE. There were divisions of Gandharians and Indians who fought in that army, were going to Athens and fighting over there. And this is there, the stele over there. In the stele, you can see the Shaka, the Hindush, the Gandhara are also part of the army, the various soldiers who took part in that fight. And these are the arrowheads that archaeologists have recovered in some museum. This lady had posted this from this particular battle. So imagine some of these arrowheads could have been used by Indians in that particular battle. Then the Library of Alexandria. We know that Library of Alexandria was at this port called Alexandria, which is in the Mediterranean. Ships that would come and berth over here take a caravan, land caravan to the Red Sea. In the Red Sea, Indian ships would be waiting for them. When the monsoon winds are right, they'll go and trade with India. Then the Indian ships would bring these merchants back, deposit them here when the wind is correct, and they do this land bridge and go. But here, the emperor called Ptolemy, he decreed that any ship that is berthing over here must give their books for them to copy. So they'd copy the books, give the copy to the them, and keep the original in this library. So they amassed 40,000 works or so. It was an important component of transmission of knowledge from India to the West. We know all these people in Greece: Euclid, Archimedes, Eratosthenes, Hipparchus, Theon, Hypatia, Aristarchus. They all use the resources of this library. So it's not surprising to us that much of Indian knowledge is reflected over there. We know about Pythagoras, who several writers say that he visited India and he got his knowledge from India. And there are interesting connections between Pythagoras and Indian music. For example, Sulba Sutra, that talks about mathematics with strings. And Pythagoras uses string ratios to define notes. Samaveda starts with three notes. Three is sacred for Pythagoras. 3 by 2 is a ratio for his scale. Samavedic Swara has got 7 notes. Pythagoras music also is based on 7 notes. From 22 Shrutis, we get 12 semitones, 7 Swaras. In the Western tradition, 12 semitones to 7 notes. So, a lot of interesting things are there to show even music perhaps came from India. Otherwise, why would we have a situation where all over the world we have the same music? Sa re ga ma pa da ni sa. Why do we have the same tonal change from one note to the other? Is there something unique in it that different cultures will independently converge to that? Or is there a common origin? That is the issue. And we have reasons to believe that Chandogya Upanishad, Samaveda are the ones that are talking about early music, and Silva Sutras is talking about ratios of music and so on. Democritus, he is referred to as father of modern science by self-exalting Europeans. However, in Cicero, in De Finibus, and Strabo, they say he visited India and he got his knowledge from India. And a whole lot of what he says is precisely the same as Vaisheshika Sutra of Rishi Kannada. That is what we see. I'm not going to read all these things. I've spoken this earlier. And these are some of the things. Rishi Kannada on Vaisheshika Sutra, and Democritus, who's echoing the same things that Rishi has already said much earlier. Then we have in Ayurveda the Tridosha system with the Panchamahabhuta interacting with the environment. And Hippocrates, he proposed this bile system, humors and bile system, which is very similar model as this. Who was Hippocrates? He was a student of Democritus who went to India and obtained knowledge from there. The same kind of person. As well, you got Buddhist transmissions, Indo-Greek contacts, and others. All of that led to Indian knowledge coming in over here, and we are seeing knowledge in Ayurveda going into Western medicine. In fact, the so-called Hippocrates Oath, where do you think that is from? It's from Charaka Samhita. Charaka Samhita has got an exactly similar oath, but our medical schools don't use that because traditionally they say we have to use Hippocrates Oath. But they learned these things from Indians. Then Clement of Alexandria, he is the early Christian writer in 150 current era. He says Plato, he got all his philosophy from the barbarians that he came into in Egypt. And he's referring to the barbarians as people who honored their lawgivers and teachers, designating them as gods, like for us, gurus are devam, right? Things of that nature, and so on. And by barbarians, he's referring to the Brahmins, basically. And he's saying over here, so philosophy was cultivated publicly by all the Brahmins, and they were strictly defied by the race of Egyptians, Chaldeans, and Arabians. In other words, these other civilizations were paying obeisance to the Brahmins from India for their knowledge. That is what he's saying over here. And so on. Going forward, he's talking about the Brahmins here and much more over here. This is from early Christian writings, this text on Clement. So this is somebody who lived 2,000 years ago. From that perspective, he's calling out who in Egypt, who were the Brahmins over there, how they were treated in the society, and so on. Greek epistemology, we know that the big three are Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. But if you read the philosophy, the epistemology of Plato over here, it is exactly same to Vaisheshika. Vaisheshika said Pratyaksha Anumana and perception inference. Two kinds of perception, external and internal, right? One with sense objects, one with the mind. And you're finding the same thing over here, knowledge obtained from senses for objects. Plato does not consider this as real knowledge. Real knowledge comes from the mind. So we see the same as Vaisheshika, as an epistemology is present over here. We have a situation where many Greek historians know about India, whereas Indians seem to be clueless about the outside world. There's no need for Indians to know about the outside world, but everybody in the old days wanted to trade with India, come and study in India, and all those kind of things. So great interest was there outside of India. So in reality, this is the situation. Rather than that first picture that I showed to you, everything is coming into India, my research has shown everything is out of India in various time frames. To Sumeria in 3000 BCE, to the Fertile Crescent in 2000 BC with the monsoon failure, from here going on to various parts of the world over here. Through the Greek philosophers, Hittites to the Minoans, to the Islamic transmission, Indo-Roman trade transmission, Armenia, Syria transmission. So I have shown in my research that at every period of time, Indian knowledge is impacting worlds to the west as well as to the east. I've only shown the west here because I'm talking to you about India and Europe. That's what I'm trying to talk to you about over here. And I've shown this kind of an interaction. Even Christianity has been impacted by Vedantic ideas. Very, very quickly, I'll show you some of these things. Starting with Neoplatonism, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, greatly influenced by Pythagoras. We know that. In fact, Upanishads' influence is clear on their philosophies. We can see that. Gurukulam style of teaching. We had somebody called Ammonius Saccas, who was an Indian philosopher or yogi resettled in Greece. So he taught Plotinus, who founded Neoplatonism. In that, there is great influence of Vedanta with referring to the one or Brahman. And this believes in reincarnation, it believes in tapasya, samadhi, perfection. Such souls will merge with the one, lesser ones will be reincarnated. These ideas influence both Christianity through Augustine and Aquinas, two great Christian leaders. The theological DNA of church has Indic contributions. From the early Greek philosophers who were considered as pagan, we got Ammonius Saccas, who lived in 175 current era. His student is Plotinus, who got his Neoplatonism. And his student is also Origen, who was an early Christian theology person in 230 current era. And they had several things, like, for example, in Neoplatonism, it said that you have the physical eye, images, shadow, reflections, mind's eye, soul, intelligence, belief, finally, the one or being. So you ascend this way. Christianity also saw that as secular material world, religious, spiritual, God, and Christ. I needn't even tell you that the model for this is very similar to Antakarana that you have, where you have Manas, Buddhi, Ahamkara, and awareness, where this is the kind of model that we have for this. This is a work from Bibhudev Mishra, very interesting series of collections where he's shown in several Christian art there seems to be mudras that are shown. Mudras are uniquely Indian because these are related to Ayurveda. Ayurveda relates each of these fingers to the Panchamahabhutas. And we believe that by holding them while you're doing meditation, you are touching on some nerve centers and things like that that can give you some benefit or the other. That's what Ayurveda believes in. And here we are seeing this Prithvi Mudra to balance earth element, promoting healing and spiritual balance. This is there in this Moscow museum where Christ is holding that particular mudra. Very interesting. Prana Mudra. You're seeing the Prana Mudra that is used in India for this reason, and Christ is holding this Prana Mudra. This is in Mount Sinai. Apana Mudra. This is a purification mudra to detoxify, purify the body, and Christ is holding that over here, Amsterdam Museum. Karana Mudra. dispels negativity, fear, depression, and so on. And you can see when the Pope is holding something like that. The Shunya Mudra decreases the space element and so on. Healing Mudra. Christ is known as a healer, right? So they use this symbolism to show all the healing properties and so on. Dhyana Mudra, used by yogis to meditate, build ability to concentrate and heal. You're seeing Christ in a meditative position over here, doing something like that. Agni Mudra or the Surya Mudra, which has increased the fire element, and you're seeing this in Turkey. This monastery is showing this particular mudra. Anjali Mudra, Namaste. Namaste is such a deeply Vedantic kind of thing, saying Narayana in me is bowing to Narayana in you. That is the whole idea, but that seems to be there in this particular assumption of Mary. Abhaya Mudra is a gesture of fearlessness. When Hindu divinities show that, it is I'll protect you. When they do this, it is I'll give to you, right? Here I'm granting you something. Here I'll protect you. That is the what's mean. That's why you see Shiva over here saying I'll be your protector kind of thing. So we're seeing that in Saint Francis of Assisi. And Abhaya Mudra and Varada Mudra, we're seeing both over here. So over here too, this hand is giving and this hand is protecting. That's what you see. And here you see a similar kind of thing. Arthapataka Mudra, a different mudra once again in Italy. So all of these things are showing that there is some kind of connection between early Christianity and Vedantic ideas. They were not cleanly separated. Many ideas from Vedanta was used. And Augustine of Hippo, he was somebody called a Manichean, a Neoplatonist. Then he became a Christian. He underwent a yogic trance recounted as a mystic experience. But an even bigger issue is Aquinas, who in 1250 is the greatest theologian of Catholic faith. He wrote a work called Summa Theologica. The funny thing is, he left it incomplete. He left it incomplete because he got a yogic transformation. He went into meditative state, then he said, what I've experienced is so great that nothing like this matters anymore. So he stopped writing that Catholic theology, stopped it over there. Very interesting to see these things. There's a lot of influence of Vedanta in Christian works. For example, I destroy the darkness born of ignorance, the shining light of wisdom. Bhagavan Krishna is saying in Bhagavad Gita. Christ is saying in John, I am the light of the world. He follows me, will not walk in darkness. I am the origin of the whole world, dissolution, beginning, middle, and end. That's what Krishna is saying. I am the Alpha, Omega, the first and last, beginning and the end. Jesus is saying that. I'm not going to read all these things, but in many, many places you find exactly the same Vedanta statement is there in Christianity also. All right, coming now to 2000 to 1000 years ago, through sea and land based trade, a lot of connections between Europe and India. I've talked about this at length in the past, where the Indo Roman trade from Roman lands that come by the Mediterranean Sea, park over here, cross a land bridge, and in the Red Sea, Indian ships would take them to all these lands for trading. So we know about this. Recently, we had the Kushan era Brahmi writing that was found in Berenike in northern tip of Africa, Egypt, by this particular professor who also recovered some murtis of Buddha and others over there. The famous Pompeii Lakshmi, made of ivory statue, it is found in the ruins of Pompeii. It came from the Shatavahana Empire. It exemplifies this Indo-Roman trade relations at that particular time. Dioscorides is a Greek physician who lived between 50 to 70 current era. He wrote a 5-volume work on materials used for making drugs, in which a huge number of them are Indian herbs, recipes for making drugs, and so on. And this was used for 16 centuries in Europe. These are some of the things I photocopied from his book over there. These are all Indian plants that are used, and it says why it should be used, what kind of fever it will cure, and so on. Clearly showing that Indian medicine was being in use in these areas. Arikimede, nothing remarkable over here, except that Romans used to trade in this area in southern India. This is very interesting. This came out in Twitter about 3 or 4 months back, maybe in January, by the Israel Antiquities Authorities. They wanted to see what were the discards by the caravans that used to be there in this Roman trade time, Indo-Roman trade time. What were the things they were discarding the garbage dumps? So they actually went to the garbage dumps of the old to try to see what was discarded. And this is something that they published. They found these swatches of this cotton cloth over here. And they said these are all from India on the Silk Road, 1,300 years old, shows the workmanship, the technology, trade, and styles. You can see this might pass off as modern cloth itself if you take a look at it. This is the kind of workmanship that Indians had at a very ancient period of time. We know about the Silk Road, where informal trade network between Mediterranean lands, Central Asia, India, China, Southeast Asia. Indian works are also found over here, which is why I say that Indian knowledge was also part of this transmission network. Then we know before Islam came to Iran and other such places, they were already having Indian medicines practiced there in Chandishapur in Iran, Persia, where they had Indian medicine and a center of learning in India. This is the ruins of Jundishapur today. So in Sassanid time, it was a center of medicine and learning. The Skosuru Wan, he had sent his physician to invite Indian and Chinese scholars over here. Also, a whole lot of Greek philosophers who were called pagans in Christian Europe, they fled there and he gave refuge to them. And they were all working together here. After Islamic conquest, this whole place fell into decline. We also know during the trade routes, the Jews had a deep presence in India. In the Jewish tradition itself, it says that the first Jews landed on Indian shores thousands of years ago from Israel on trade missions from King Solomon. It talks about how they had peacock feathers, ivory, and other such things in the Old Testament, showing very, very ancient links. Then we know that when the Romans captured Jerusalem and destroyed the second temple, 70 current era, that led to another wave of immigrants landing up in Kerala. Why did they come to Kerala? Because they knew that's a trade route. They were already at the forefront of the trade, Indo-Roman trade. So they knew you could come by trade to India. In 1568, when Spanish Inquisition was going on, places like Portugal, Spain, they were killing off the Muslims, killing off the Jews, and so on. So a whole lot of Jews fled over there and again landed in India, in west coast of India. They were called Pardesis, or the white Jews. After Israel was formed in 1948, they all emigrated out, so they're no longer in India. But this is also a connection of India to Europe, where knowledge transmission continued to take place. Then the Nestorians. Today's Syrian Christians are the descendants of the Nestorians. Nestorians are people who were persecuted in Byzantine kingdom because of their beliefs on Christianity. They had some strange, slight belief, and because of that, they were called heretical. And they were his followers. They fled to Persia, to Kerala through the trading route because the trade was already there, Indo-Roman trade. They knew how to come to India. That's how they landed up in Kerala. But they maintained connection with Antioch, Nisibis, Edessa, the Nestorians, I mean, and these are centers of learning in Syria where a whole lot of Indian works was being studied over here, theology, philosophy, medicine, in this time frame, 350 to 600 current era, they were studying these things. Syrian and Armenian merchants, they were also at the forefront of some of these transmissions. What evidence do we have for that? This is a Syrian bishop called Severus Sabbath who lived in this time frame. He is rebuking the Greeks because the Greeks are arrogant people. They think they are civilized and they are the height of technology and so on. And he's saying, you don't know anything about the Indians. The Indians and their form of computation surpasses description. You have no idea how powerful they are. If you knew a little bit about how good they are, then maybe you'll not be so snobbish. You'll be convinced there are also others who know something. So from his writings, we know that he's already exposed to Indian mathematics and others. How did that happen? Through the Kerala connection, the Syrian Christian connection. We know that in Syria, already Indian knowledge is in all these places. Armenia had contact with India for a long time. We have evidence of a community there in 5th century BCE. When Alexander wanted to come to India, he used Armenians who told him how to come to India because they were already doing land-based trades with India, right? So they were like spies who told him how to come to India. Then we know that this historian, he says Armenians knew the Indian context, economic life, social, general political geography because they are merchants. If you have to be good at the business, you must know your customer, right? So they have invested time to know about the Indians, their culture, practice, and other such things. Referring to Hindu language as musical. Thomas Kana, he sought sanctuary in Malabar coast. His descendants are called the Kanayan Christians in Kerala even today. And so on. They trade many things. In 1688, they helped the British now to find their way to India, within India. They're given the status of free citizens of England, and so on. Today, we've got communities in Kolkata, Chennai, Mumbai, Agra, where Armenian churches are there. But we've got a long history of trade relations with Armenia. That is the bottom line here. Going on to 1300 to 500 years ago, the Muslim era, after bin Qasim's invasion of Sindh, Indian knowledge is taken from here, taken to Baghdad, where translations of Sanskrit works are made into Persian and Arabic and injected into all the Islamic lands. This is all Abbasid Empire. So from India into Iran, into Arabia, into Egypt, into Tunisia, Morocco, Algiers, up to southern Spain. So Indian knowledge is injected into all these places in the 10th century, 11th century, 12th century, and so on. Rather, from this time, from 700 to 1000 current era. Some of the greatest scientists of the Arabian world, Al-Fazari, Al-Kindi, Ibn Sina, they all learned only from Indian knowledge. Prior to getting Indian knowledge, they had no learning at all. But after these translations of Suri Siddhanta, Charaka Samhita, Shishruta Samhita, that is how they learned much of this. Baghdad House of Wisdom was set up by Caliph Harun al-Rashid, where it was a translation school for many of these works, Sanskrit, Greek, Syrian works into Arabic. So this is a place where a lot of things were translated. However, when the Mughals invaded, they destroyed this library. But this is a famous name in mathematics, history of mathematics, Nasir al-Tusi. He rescued 400,000 manuscripts, which he took to Azerbaijan. And because of that, we know some transmission happened to Europe, and we have survived with that particular mathematical knowledge. And in Europe, medieval Europe also talks a lot about Indian knowledge. Isidore of Leonardo of Pisa, this Alexander de Well, this rabbi, and others. So they all talk about the numbers that Indians had, history of numbers, and so on. Gerbert of Aurillac, 1000 current era, he later on became the Pope Sylvester. He studied Indian mathematics. He also found an abacus using which he was able to do computations much better than using Roman numerals, but it did not become that popular. Leonardo Fibonacci, we know that when he was a kid, his father was in Algeria, so he used to accompany him where he was in contact with Muslim merchants. The Muslim merchants told him how to use Indian numbers for mathematics, computation, and others. That is how he learned Indian mathematics and computation. We know that I've talked about this at length in my previous talks. Indian knowledge first went out to the Greeks and the Romans. It was destroyed by the Christians when Roman Empire became Christian, but some of it survived in Lebanon, Beirut, and other such places. It was inherited by the Muslims when Arabia became Islamic. Also, Indian knowledge was destructively obtained from India. Arabs consolidated all that knowledge, was injected into Europe, translated into Latin in Toledo, as well as in Sicily into the 10th and 13th century. So we know that in Toledo, a translation school took many of these works. This particular name, Gerard of Cremona, who translated 87 Arabic texts to Latin, math, astronomy, medicine. Similarly, in Italy also, Sicily was part of the Islamic Empire at that time, and they too had access to a lot of Indian works, and there too translations were taking place. I'm not going to read all these things. This is very interesting. This was something that British libraries released about 1 year back. When I saw that, I said, this is very remarkable. They said this is an example of a 12th century illustrated manuscript of surgery in Britain. I laughed because it is exactly the same as Shushruta Samhita's procedures: hemorrhoid surgery, cataract surgery, nasal growth surgery. Like I said, Indian knowledge was taken from India and it went to the Arabs. From Arabs, it was injected into southern Spain. From southern Spain, it was translated into Latin and gone to northern Spain, where it's Christian. From there, it is diffused to all of Western Europe. So within the 12th century, this knowledge has come to Britain, and they've got illustrated books that show how to do surgery, Shishruta's surgical methods. Very interesting to see this. Skip this, including mathematics. This is a book from 1556, The Castle of Knowledge by Robert Record. This shows how to multiply 5541 by itself 3 times by shift and add multiplication. Something that is so common to even our high school kids and our primary school kids. But this one shows how to do something like that in a master-scholar dialogue. master-scholar dialogue is very popular in India from the Upanishads itself, where the scholar asks a question, master replies the answer. Even as recent as Bhaskaracharya's work Leelavati, we find similar kind of master-student kind of dialogue over there. You see a similar style over here in teaching how to do this. But why I put this here is to show only in 1556 they were able to do Indian numbers of this nature. 100 years after this is Isaac Newton. Is it possible in 100 years they went to such a pinnacle of learning? It's just something to think about. Then 500 years ago, connections between India and Europe, the philosopher's lies. Well, there is a deep impact of Vedanta on Western philosophy. If you read this essay, for example, it says Western culture traces its origin to the ancient Greeks who idolized the Brahmins of India. Pythagoras' doctrine is derived from Vedic traditions. Socrates, he met traveling Brahmins in Athens. And so a lot of reported things are there, commonality between these things. And even the Renaissance, Enlightenment were informed by Greek ideals of political liberty, man as measure of things, control of the environment, all illuminated by light from the East. Immanuel Kant collected information about India from travel books. Voltaire wrote, I'm convinced everything has come from the banks of the Ganga, and so on. And so we can divide Western philosophy in three categories. First is Greek cosmocentrism. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, later on Neoplatonism, they all had Vedanta ideas ever since Pythagoras, and I showed you about Vaisheshika that is used there and so on. So they had Greek ideas. They were concerned with looking at the cosmos, just like Indians were looking as here on earth, so also in the cosmos. Those kind of ideas, they were using that. Then, when Europe became Christian in 330 current era, they adopted Christianity as a state religion. They fell into dark ages. It became a theocracy. From 330 current era to 1500s, there's no questioning. If you question, it's blasphemy, right? You'll be killed. So learning, everything stopped over there. Till there were free thinkers over here, that society was progressing. Then for more than 1,000 years, they were a backward people over here. Eventually, 1500s, they had this post-modernism, postmodernism that has helped them to move where they are. Who are the heroes of this whole Enlightenment era? One of them is Rene Descartes, for example, and he resurrected atomic theory in Europe after Democritus. It is essentially the same as Vaisheshika. Vaisheshika already has an atomic theory, which is what Democritus has said, which is what Descartes was saying. And the question is, was he exposed to Indian epistemology through Arabic to Latin translations? That is one person. Other one is Spinoza. Spinoza is a very important philosopher in Enlightenment, and you can see over here this Theodor Goldstrucker. He's saying the similarities between Spinoza's religious conception and Vedanta tradition. Same thing is said by Max Muller. Max Muller is saying striking similarity between Vedanta system of Spinoza. The Brahman as conceived by Upanishads and defined by Shankara is clearly the same as Spinoza's substantia. So these are the kind of people who were driving the modern thought in Europe after they were coming out of theocracy. Voltaire, another big name, right? He was critical of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, their practices of slavery, and so on. He saw Vedanta as noble, superior to Christianity, and shaming immorality of European imperialists, and so on. So many of the modern thinkers also were influenced by Vedanta. That's what I want to show over there. Finally, going to the last slice, 300 years to present time, where the colonial people, that resulted in a total destruction of India as we know it. Until this point, we still had everything going well, but then things have changed from here on. So we know that when the Muslims, they conquered Constantinople, Mehmet, he conquered that area and a bloody massacre over there. And that locked Europe out of land trade with India. And because of economic compulsions, the Europeans wanted to find a sea route to India. They had a bigoted discovery doctrine where the Pope said, any land that you find, you can claim it for Christianity. It's such a bigoted law, but that's what it was. And in 1492, Spain funded Columbus to sail west to reach India. He landed in America. Papal bulls were issued to divide the world into two regions for exploration because both were Catholics. They didn't want them to fight. So they said this part of the globe is for Portugal, this part of the globe is for Spain. In 1498, Portugal commissioned Vasco da Gama to sail around Africa, soon followed by the French, Dutch, English, and eventually we know the sorry history later. European colonialism, first wave was Portugal and Spain colonizing Americas, African territories, and India. The colonial loot of Portugal and Spain attracted Britain, France, Netherlands to colonize Caribbean, North America. Second wave, Britons were in India, East India Company, France, Portuguese, Dutch in Asia. Third wave was the bigoted Berlin Conference, the scramble for Africa, dividing Africa between Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, Belgium, Italy, and Spain. So this is the colonization, how it spread in these areas. In 1945, this was the remaining colonization in the world. We can see India was still a colonized country and shows you how it is. So the so-called Enlightenment, the Europeans love to give self-exalting labels of this nature. They say they were Enlightenment, but Enlightenment did not prevent colonization. White colonization was fueled by Christianity, immorality, and greed. Three types: settler colonization, like in US, Canada, Australia, South Africa; exploitation colonization, like in India, Asia, and Africa; trade colonization, like in Opium Wars, opening of Japan. Started with Portuguese in Portugal and Spain, and 1600s French and Dutch colonial empires, 1700s the British colonial empire, 1800 colonization of Africa itself. It did not prevent captive markets, all the Enlightenment. It was meant so that all the colonized countries would provide cheap raw labor and material to these colonizers, where they'd make those goods in their newly industrializing factories, and the colonies would be forced to buy expensively from British factories. It did not prevent slavery. We know indentured servitude. Between these time frames, British shipped 2 million Indians as indentured laborers to 19 colonies. The Africans were even worse. 12.5 million Africans were shipped as slaves. So there's no question of any of these things called enlightenment. And we know that it had a horrendous impact on India, the colonization. We know this on many sources. I've talked about this in the past. I'm not going to go any further. This ethnocide is declared by UNESCO in this Declaration of San Jose in 1981, saying an ethnic group that is denied the right to enjoy, develop, transmit its own culture and language collectively or individually is an extreme form, massive violation of human rights. But this is exactly what the British had followed in India. I've shown in my talks that ethnocide was practiced by the British in 5 methods: creation of widespread poverty, destruction of identity through the manufactured caste, destruction of identity through the distorted history, destruction of religion via missionary activity, destruction of education systems via introduction of English. I am not going to describe all of these. I've talked in my previous talks about this, but it shows how pervasively they went about destroying everything that was in India that was completely gone in this 300 years. We completely lost it. As if that is not enough, there is a parochial growth of knowledge after that, ensuring that impoverishment of colonized countries. If you see World War I, World War II, German nationhood, the Marshall Plan, weapons, aircrafts, engines, and space between 1900s to 1950s, these were tightly controlled by European countries, United States and European countries, not given to anybody else. So this technology, they held the technology. They didn't allow others to participate. Just like in industrial revolution time, they did not allow the colonies to get industrialized. That same thinking has been there even over here. Then we went to the Cold War, NATO, Warsaw Pact, again parochial spread of knowledge and atomic knowledge, aircraft knowledge, weapons, space, medicine, electronics, 1950s to 1990s, till Soviet Union fell. This is the state of the world. Bottom line, the colonized countries could not ramp up and catch up with the Europeans who had already exploited these colonies and gone on. So that is why the world continued to be a poor place for the colonized countries over here. Then today, USA domination of a world destination for universities. They use sanctions as a foreign policy to prevent certain countries from getting knowledge. But then we also have NASA spin-offs, VLSI, PC, DARPA, Usenet, Human Genome, CRISPR technologies. Today you have got globalization, climate change, and other such things. So some positives, some negatives, but bottom line, we have had a parochial growth of knowledge. That is what we see over here. And today we are seeing, because of this exploitation of the world's resources, we are seeing climate change happen with this hockey stick kind of growth and change in anomaly in temperature that is going over there. And many suspect it's because of human activity. And if you take a look at this paper that came out in 2017, signed by 15,000 scientists, all these indicators, ozone depletion, freshwater resources, dead zones in the ocean, forest cover, vertebrate species, carbon dioxide emissions, temperature change, population, all are negative. They're all negative, showing that the quality of life is getting to be very, very bad on Earth because of man made activities. Our quest for exploiting the world more and more is leading to this. And their recommendation was promote a dietary shift towards plant based foods and to reduce the fertility rates. If we did that, then we might have some chance over here. We know that we have had many mass extinctions 440 million years ago, 365 million years ago, and our last one was when the dinosaurs died out 66 million years ago. But now we are in a Holocene extinction for the last 11,000 years caused by mankind. We can see the number of species dying out is so many over here, and so we are in a very bad shape looking at some of these indicators. So, my conclusion, I try to show you a very big picture. I labeled this talk what every Bharatiya should know about our civilization. In the lines of this, I said, let's first learn about our interaction with Europe. Because we are told that the only interaction we had with Europe was colonization. I wanted to show that is not true. We have had a deep, twisted legacy with Europe going back to thousands and thousands of years. I've used genetics, I've used archaeology, I've used texts, I've used religion, I've used various aspects to show commonality. So I first used DNA records to show out of Africa, out of India model 60,000 years ago. After the last glacial maximum ice age 20,000 years ago, we have attempted to trace human activity in Europe and Asia using DNA and cultural finds. I showed you that. Today's Europe is mixed population of these ancient populations. I described the Western hunter-gatherer, Caucasus hunter-gatherer, Eastern farmer, and so on, and how they got the blonde hair, light skin pigment. We saw a common worldwide archaeology, dolmens, stone circles, menhirs, shaman culture, and we questioned how is it that throughout the world in such a big geography, the practices are similar, whether the shaman practices are similar or even the dolmen, stone circles, menhirs, they're all similar. So my suggestion was agriculture perhaps went out of India 12,000 years ago, taking such technologies also out of India, for about 12,000 impacting the culture. I showed common Indo-European deities, whether it is Agni, Varunas, Ashwins, other such things. We traced them back to Rig Veda 10,000 years ago. We saw artifacts with Indic content in the European civilizations. And we saw that the linguistic model is failed. It cannot account for PIE, but it is used by our academia even today. I presented a paper that came out just 2 months back in 2023 that says that all the linguistic work done so far, or the ancestral DNA work done so far, does not match the study they had done mathematically. So according to them, the oldest language cutoff was between India and Iran. Why is that important? That is important if you now consider what Srikant Talagiri was talking about, right? Many years back, what was he saying? The books of the Rig Veda are not in order 1 to 10, Mandala 1 to Mandala. It's not in chronological order. Some books are earlier, some books are later. Then he says the earlier books of Rig Veda have geography to the east of India. Later books of Rig Veda have got geography to the west of India, meaning there's an east to west migration. If there's an east to west migration, at some point we assume that India and Iran will part ways, right? And that parting of the ways, according to this particular paper that I showed, is approximately 7,000 years before present, according to that result. Then we saw knowledge transfer to the Greek. I showed similarity of many Christian ideas to Vedanta, sea and land-based trade links between India and Europe, Muslim intermediaries between India and Europe knowledge transmission, how colonization destroyed India. And my bottom line is understanding of our joint past can help better positioning for our future. Our policymakers and others need to understand this deep history that we've had with Europe. Only if we understand this deep history, then we'll be able to talk from a better position on how our relations should be in the future. Otherwise, we see everything through the prism of colonization alone. But there's a much deeper history. where India was a Vishwaguru. It is not just my jingoistic statement. I've given you the evidence in many, many areas showing the contact between India and ancient Europe. Okay, with that, I think I've come to the end of my talk. Thank you very much for your attention.
Raji, you showed a map with orange and red, which is the Andamanese genome. If you could go back to that slide, you mentioned that the origin here with the orange and red shows that there is an out of India. I don't know how to read this, or is this somebody else's paper, but orange seems to be Iranian. And then the red is a marker of Andamanese.
This is how people are trying to spin it. Yes,
So, I mean, yeah, isn't it the other way around?
it's the other way around. It is the other way around.
How?
See, the thing is, when David Reich first tried to talk about this in 2018, he said 7000 BCE, Iranian farmers had come to India, migrated to India, become the ancestral South Indian, and there's another migration 3000 BC after that time frame, came to northern India, becoming the North Indian population. He said today's Indians are mixed to this ANI and ASI, that's who we are. That model is not reflecting much of our internal data. There was a 2000 year BC monsoon failure where Indians have gone out to the Fertile Crescent. Why is that data not reflecting over here? That's my question number one. Second question is, if India was a dry place in 1800 BC and so on, why would people come inside? They'd want to go outside where water is, right? That's second. Third, I said that many of our texts talk about the Anu and the Drihyu who are leaving India after the Dasaragnya battle and settling elsewhere. That is there. Many, many Puranas references are there. I said does not show over here. So I said there are many, many red flags that go. According to the data I have and what they are presenting, does not match. Then I said, can you do sensitivity analysis? You have used a mathematical process to converge to an answer. In that, if you remove some data points out and put some other data points in, you do the mathematical study again, will you converge to the same answer? And I said, if it converges to the same answer, that means you have a robust result. I can buy that. But if it converges to a different answer, that means your earlier result was strongly dependent on these few data points that you removed out. And David Reich seems to have done exactly that. In the next paper that he published in 2019, he introduced 11 additional samples that were in cultural proximity with Indus Valley civilization from Iran. By putting those ancient samples into his mathematical mix, now his mathematical result converged to a different answer. They went back on the earlier result. Earlier result meaning 7000 BC, Iranian farmers had come to India. They retracted that. But they still maintain that Aryan invasion had happened in 1500 BC. At the same period of time, this paper came out. This is by Vasant Shinde, Neeraj Rai, and others in Cell. Why is this not? Vasant Shinde, Neeraj Rai, and others, including David Reich. She's also a signatory on this paper. This is the famous Harappa genome, right? They finally managed to get some DNA content from the Harappa. Yes, 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 yes. After many attempts, they managed to get the DNA content. They sent it off to Korea for South Korea for analysis, I guess for non-partisan purposes. And this is the final result. This is showing that what we call Indus Valley Klein is this orange color mixed with this red color, but the common ancestor here goes back to great antiquity. This is the first migration that we have in empty DNA out of Africa into India 50,000 years ago. We're referring to that ancient mix, some kind of commonality that is there over there. But then this is now showing, like I said, first in a culture you have hunter-gatherers, then you have herders, then you have farmers. That is the evolution.
So help me understand. And this is layman, right? Absolutely, just somebody who can't read this. So does this say that if I look on the y-axis, that somewhere around between 2 to 4,000 BC is when the Indus Valley Klein with 50 to 80% what is orange?
Harappa genome is in this time frame.
Yeah.
Belongs in this time frame, yes.
So the Iranian is way older,
Right.
which carries the orange one. So isn't
Right.
it right to then assume that Iranian is leading to?
How could we do that? Because to do that, you should have at least, see the point, this is what I always say. We cannot infer the direction that easily from graphs of this nature or even studies of this nature. If we had a Harappa genome that is even earlier somewhere here, with the same orange, then we could doubtlessly say something like this happened. But here, what you see is between this genome and this genome, there is a common link that is greater than 1000, 10,000 BCE. This is a common ancestor over here. From this common ancestor, you have the Iranian hunter gatherer. From there, going on to the Iranian herder. From there, going on to the Iranian farmer with this Anatolian 30% Anatolian farmer category. Yeah. So this to me is showing don't get too caught up in the chronology, because this is only reflecting the data people have got so far, whatever data you have so far. From the data we have so far, it is implying something like this. All the other data that I put together is implying it is out of India. So I'm reading this data also in the same light. And if we had some earlier samples, maybe we could say that without any doubt at all. But if you look at this one over here, for example, that is saying that from Anatolia it goes into India 7,400 years before. This I'm saying does not make sense, because it appears to be from India, this knowledge is going out based on all the other data I gave, archaeobotany, in Sumerian accounts itself. If you look at Sumerian accounts, they say we learned everything from people who came from the Persian Gulf. And they taught us writing, they taught us civilization, they taught us agriculture. This is there in Babylonica. In Babylonica, Besorus is talking about this. But then I also showed a paper, right? I showed a paper that says that even agriculture seems to have come from India going into these lands. So I'm putting many, many pieces together to make an inference of this nature.
Yeah, correct. I was just referring to try and understand the genetic map. Now, there is something that I heard Neeraj Rai in one of the talks. I don't know whether it was with us or somewhere else. Probably somewhere else. He mentioned that you find the mRNA
R1A, okay. R1A, yes, that's a marker.
somewhere in Indonesia or Southeast Asia or somewhere else, and then it seems to appear somewhere in Iran. So he says, how can it skip a few thousand kilometers?
Let me back up with my understanding. This R1A R1 has got two particular downstream as you go to higher and higher resolution. R1B, R1A. R1B is in Scandinavian countries. R1A is in Uttar Pradesh, and there's a little bit in Tocharian lands and a little bit in Central Asia. So people said R1A is probably the language gene, especially its deeper constituents, R1, A1, A1, those kind of things. They said that is the one that brought language into India. So people started studying where did that originate. I've talked about that in previous talks. Several people said it could be in South Asia, Northwest India. Some people said Central Asia. So there's no consensus as such between scientists, but many seem to be leaning towards even R1A perhaps originated in India itself and went out.
Coming back to your beginning slides around origin of mankind in Africa and spreading around the coast and all. In some of your earlier talks, you've talked about stone tools, which
Yes.
is in India in
Yes, yes.
1 million years old.
I'm glad you
And-
asked that. Yes,
Uh,
yes.
So, are you, in your worldview, were there multiple origins of the human species in different parts of the world?
See, the problem is we are all seduced into these words, right? When we say Homo sapien, did the Homo sapiens suddenly come 200,000 years ago, or are we a continuum with earlier species? No creator came and created the DNA for Homo sapien 200,000 years ago. We came from earlier species, right? That's what we are. So it's a continuum. The question is, what kind of continuum? Could the same thing have originated in different parts of the world? Very, very possible. Like I've shown in Sangam talks earlier, in India, we have found a Narmada skull. Narmada skull 350,000 years ago by Arun Sonakia in 1982, he found that. It has got a cranial capacity of 1400 cc, similar to modern humans' cranial capacity. So the question is that a Homo erectus or is that Homo sapien? So Kenneth Kennedy, who was a bone specialist, he said it's got to be an archaic Homo sapien. That is not the only one, right? Shanti Papu, in her research, she found in Athirampakam in Tamil Nadu, she found stone tools from 380,000 years to 175,000 years ago, made by an advanced thinking human, where the tools had special cutting edges, long cutting edge, short cutting edge, some for javelin point, some for scraping the flesh from the skin, various kinds of things. That kind of stone tool planning calls for abstract thinking and ability to plan ahead, associated with Homo sapiens. So she said the fact that intelligent beings were making these tools in Tamil Nadu 380,000 years ago should reframe our thinking of out of Africa. So this out of Africa was a model that came about some time back when people found these early markers that seem to be in Africa, seem to be in India, out of the world, whatever is showed in mtDNA, that still holds. But there were also other species. Some people think they were Denisovans. Denisovans are a group that there was some content found in Denisova, the cave Denisova, and from that we inferred these people called Denisovans, whose range included India all the way to Papua New Guinea, right? So they perhaps were living in India in this time frame. I don't think it's a settled question, but what we can say is there certainly were more than one species.
I had on WhatsApp shared with you a video of who called titled "Who Lived Here," by somebody who's been researching on evolution of Homo sapiens, and towards the end of his long video, he says that the entire theory of evolution of the human species breaks down the moment you get into South Asia or India, basically. He says just 50 kilometers apart, at probably the same time, there are two different types of hominid species who are making tools surviving. So it just completely is bizarre. So I don't know if it was a unique to India feature, or was it. They seem to say that, at least these people seem to say that it is somehow unique to the Indian subcontinent.
I would think because of our geography, if India is connected to the north, Himalayas can't get over there, this east side, great jungles and malaria and other such things in monsoon time. So one way to get to India is through the Khyber Pass to this side. But once you get into India and move southwards, there's nowhere to go after the south. You've gone to the tip of India, nowhere else to go. That is why we find an accumulation of tools in southern part of India. Some of the oldest tools you're finding southern part of India, not in other parts. This is the reason why. So similarly, there are other similar geographies. For example, Indonesia, where they found this Floresiensis specimen along with others. There are islands, right? There's nowhere to go but you're there. So chances are you'll find such kinds of things there too.
And I'll conclude with just two comments. One, the Pashupati seal, which is somehow a lot of people known as Shiva. There's a contrarian view, and our side of contrarian view, Murugendra Vinodji, who's a Rigvedic Shastri, seems to think it is a Yajman sitting in a Yajna. And so just wanted to put that out. I found his arguments very strong also for that. Instead of being Shiva or Proto Shiva or whatever is the normal, he says it's a Yajman who's sitting there and they are supposed to don all this and sit in a yogic posture when they are doing the yajna.
It could be possible. It could be possible. I don't have any reason to use that to break down anything that I'm saying.
See, no. This is not a challenge. I just wanted to share. And the Gundestrup cauldron, there's a picture and a replica of this at one of the TCS innovation centers in Chennai, if I'm not wrong. And Srinivasanji, who used to head that, showed me that many years ago. And he seems to have an interpretation of calling it the Gajalakshmi.
There's a lot. There's a lot in Sumeria. If you go, there's a lot of things to talk about. I don't know when to begin, when to stop. There's so much to put in over here. Maybe at some point we can do just India and Babylon. There's enough to talk about the cultural exchanges and things like that. We find Lakshmi and other things in that culture also coming in from there.
So this is a very, very brilliant analysis that you've done. I've got just two questions, and I'm sure you would have thought about that and even done research on that. So there's so much of knowledge that's gone from India outside to Europe and other places. So the most basic part of our Hindu civilization, if I can say, would be the Varna Vyavastha, right? So are there any echoes of this Varna Vyavastha in countries like wherever this knowledge went 2000 years back? That's the first question.
Well, let me answer that first. So we cannot expect 100% one-to-one kind of mapping. But what we do see in ancient Egypt, Mesopotamian societies and others is an organization of their society, similarly with workers, with scribes. Scribes are very important in their technology, in their societies, with the army, with the military people, with the pharaoh or the king at the very top. So we do find an organization of the society into workers all the way to the king. So we find that in Egypt, we find that in Mesopotamia, Babylon, other places, very, very similar kind of organization of society.
So we keep on, this is particularly with regard to India. So us, we people living in North India, we know very little about the ancient traditions of South India. We know that there was something called Sangam. And then we also, there's some kind of a myth or something that there was a Kumari Kandam or something down south and all that. So does your research establish any solid bridge between North India and South India based on solid proof that there was, bridge, some kind of a bridge between both the two parts of India? And how correct is the historicity of Kumari Kandam? Because you've done research back to maybe several thousand years.
Yeah, so all my talks go towards showing a pan-India civilization. I don't, my central premise is there's no Aryan, there is no Dravidian, there's no tribal. We are one. Bharatiya people, we are one. That is my central premise on all the talks I've given on Sangam talks also. They're the same premise. I've given a talk on Sangam called India from the deep south to the north. Do take a look at that. That addresses what we are asking directly. Over there, I'm pointing out this notion of Kumari Kandam. Where did it even come from? Kumari Kandam is a notion that came in 16th century or so. It does not refer to a land bridge from Madagascar to Australia to southern India. It does not refer to that. It refers to a place where Shiva worshipping Brahmins used to live. It is in that context Kumari Kandam was used in the 16th century by a poet. So this notion of this huge continent came about when people did not know why do the fossils appear to be the same on different continents. For example, it is a dinosaur fossil that is there in Africa that might be there in India also. So people ask, how is that possible? Or it might be there in Africa, Europe, and some other place. Then people inferred that maybe all the continents were joined at one time, and that is why we have fossils being found everywhere. Around that time, people did not know anything about plate tectonics. So this failed idea of Lemuria came about at that time. Lemuria was why are the monkeys, lemurs, there in Madagascar and India? To address that, this notion of Lemuria, there must have been a land bridge from India to Madagascar and so on. Tamil nationalists seized upon this failed idea in 19th century and proposed that there was an ancient Tamil kingdom that was there all the way from Madagascar to Australia to southern India, and that is where the Sangams had taken place because the Tamil literature preserves cultural memory of three Sangam periods. First Sangam period going back 10,000 years, second Sangam period going back about 3,000 years, and one more Sangam period. So the question is, where did they go? Tamil literature itself says the earlier Sangam places in a place called Then Madurai, southern Madurai, that drowned out, that went under the water. So they have a cultural memory of a submergence event. So they presumed that there was a land bridge and that is submerged over here. So in that talk, what I did was I used Google Earth to try and find out the altitude in various places in Australia, India, Sri Lanka, and other places. And I showed that 90 kilometers outside the coast of India, the sea shelf falls by almost 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers. Even just outside Sri Lanka, it falls over there. And if you go to deep ocean, obviously it is 5 kilometers and so on. So there is no place outside the continental shelf of India that would have been a candidate for Kumari Kandam. I showed that if Kumari Kandam was there, it was up to 80 kilometers to 90 kilometers outside our present day shoreline. That would have been visible during the last glacial maximum. You remember I showed a picture of a last glacial maximum. Most of the water was locked up in ice, which means the sea level would have been visible far beyond where it is today. You get what I'm saying? 2 years back, a professor called Ramaswamy, he published a paper in Current Science. He's from Bharatidasan University in Tiruchirappalli. He used underwater remote operated vehicles to try and do sonar and other imagery of the ocean floor in the Bay of Bengal. not just ordinary ocean floor, but around 15 kilometers outside present-day Pumpuhar, about 122 meters below. And he says he's found the remains of ancient settlements over there. Are you with me? Ancient settlements. He says a man-made harbor over there, including other man-made structures, 122 meters below the sea level. The only time this would have been possible is 18,000 years ago, when most of the water was locked up in ice. That is when the shoreline would have been visible. And he's shown evidence that that city was relocated about 3 or 4 times as the water level kept rising, when the ice was melting and water level kept rising. So what we know from many studies of this nature is that during last glacial maximum, some land would have been visible, which has become submerged after the water levels went up. It is not a huge continent. That is the bottom line. This memory is preserved in Tamil literature to the present time. It is not a huge continent, but certainly some amount of land which we can call Kumarikandam. They didn't refer to as Kumarikandam. In fact, Tamil literature says one of the kings, I forget which king it was, Pallava or somebody, he seized land from his neighbor equal to what he lost to the sea. You see what I'm saying? Such a memory is also there in Tamil literature. So, no continent wide kind of Kumari Kandam. Certainly, an ancient remembrances are there. And I have also shown that in that particular talk, from the deep south to the north, however far back you go into Tamil literature, you cannot divorce it from the Vedic tradition. These are not my words. These are the research of David Shulman. He's a professor in Hebrew University in Israel who has worked on Tamil literature. He wrote a book, Tamil, a biography. And this is also the words of Dr. Nagaswamy, who passed away recently, ASI General in Southern India. So he too said the same thing. Both of them say you go to any period of time in Tamil Nadu, you'll find deep interconnections with the Vedic culture. There is no question of they had a different culture, we had a different culture, this is North Indian culture, this is South Indian culture. No such thing. We have had even the earliest Sangam era works, Silapatikaram is a work that talks of the protagonists are Kovalan and Kannagi. Their wedding was conducted by Vedic rites, the normal Vedic rites. What does that even tell you? Even in an early period of time, you had that. When the tsunami hit southern India, a brick temple was uncovered, a Hindu brick temple dating back to 200 BCE. So 200 BCE, you had that. Adichanallur, urn burials, the British have said they found Trishulams over there associated with Shiva. Also, in one of the urn burials, they found skeletons sitting in a samadhi position, yogic samadhi position. You know, urn burial, what I'm talking about, right? Adichanallur, they used to bury them in huge pots. So, sitting in a samadhi position. One more urn burial, the British say they found a stone Ganesha. Adichanallur is now going back to very ancient periods of time, anywhere from 1000 BC to 500 BC. We are talking about this kind of. So, the bottom line, there is no period of time in southern India where you can divorce it from the Vedic culture. That's what it is.
So, I read a Hindi book. It was written by it's actually a compilation of several articles, and it was edited by Vyogi Hariji way back in 1960s. And my interest in Tamil history got kindled after I read an article, a part of that book, on the Tamil history. It was written by one Mr. Iyengar or some, I don't. So that set me thinking, and I keep on reading snatches about the commonalities between North and South India and all, but there's no central repository of resource. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
Which says that beyond 200 BC also, though we've got Valmiki Ramayana, which says about Pandyans and all, but we don't have a central repository of something like that you've done here,
Right.
which establishes something between beyond 200 BC as well.
Right.
So that's my central point.
It's a good question. You might remember in several of my talks, I put a slide saying this for common sense. In that slide, I give the names of dozens and dozens of Indian intellectuals, various geographies of India, various timelines of India, whether it's Abhinava Gupta, Agatyar, Andal, or Vishnu Datta, or Vyasa, or Yagnavalkya and others. And I say, in any one of these writings, Do you see any of them saying we used to live in Central Asia and we came to India, we crossed the mountains and we lived here? Do you see any of them saying we fought with the people there, we pushed them to the south? Or in the south, do you see that we used to live in the north and we were pushed down to the south? Or do you see anybody saying we are North Indians, they are South Indians? Or do you see anybody say that we are dark skinned and they are light skinned? Not a single work. Not a single work in any geography of India, any chronology of India talks or has cultural memory, imagination, remembrance of such a invasion migration. The bottom line is we are one people. We were made into Aryans and Dravidians and tribals by the missionaries and British 200 years ago. And we believe this nonsense completely today. But this is completely untrue. Nowhere in India, any Indian works, you'll find such a division. So this is our internal evidence, which we choose to ignore.
I think so. I have two questions. They, of course, unrelated to this talk. So this is on related to Tithis and our way of calendaring. Dr. Subhash Kak, if I'm not wrong, pointed out that we are not celebrating our festivals on accurate dates, and that's probably because of precision, if I remember vaguely.
Yes.
Do you have a view on that?
I have written an entire article in Swarajya on this. So you can take a look at that. In Swarajya, I have an article on Makar Shankranti. Are we celebrating it on the correct day? There's a solar festival, and it's my belief that we're off by about 15 days. See, there are two things. One is Makar Shankranti only meant to represent when does the sun enters Makar constellation? If that is what we want, well and good. That's what we do. But is it also supposed to be at the time of winter solstice? At some point in the past, winter solstice matched along with Makar Shankranti. So, what are we celebrating? That is the point. If you're celebrating the Makar Shankranti precisely when the sun enters there, no problem. We're doing it correctly. But if we are also marking this winter solstice, then we are very much off. From December 22nd, we are down to January 14th. We're very much off on that.
And what is it supposed to be traditionally?
If it is meant to mark winter solstice, it should be reset to December 22nd.
Traditionally, what is the Hindu view on this?
We call it Makar Shankranti, so I'll go with that. Okay. So it is when the sun enters the Makar constellation, the Capricorn constellation.
Okay, so in that view, this is correct.
Yes. So it is the semantics we use. What are the semantics we use? We need to understand the original intent. What was the intent? At least 2000 years ago, these coincided. In that article, I tried to show it also marks a harvest festival. There are several rabi crops and other crops in India, depending on various monsoon times and so on. I've tried to show what are the crops during which time this Makar Shankranti will be celebrated. All over India, we use till, gingerly or sesame, right? We use sesame to make certain offerings during this particular time. Not only in north, south, east, west, everywhere it's the same. So the question comes, is it something associated with harvest during that time? So I made various connections over there. You can see that.
And also, Subhash Kakji, I think very old tweet, if I remember, and this is 4 or 5 years back when we didn't have good monsoons, maybe just as Narendra Modi had assumed power, 13, 14, 14, 15, somewhere around that, if I'm not wrong. And he said that if we look at the Hindu calendar, we will have better explanations for why the monsoons are seeming to be failing and why we have heat and less rain and more rain. We are looking at the Western calendaring system and then trying to decipher. We would do a much better job if we did that.
I don't have the superior insight, Subhash Kakji's genius over here. So there's no doubt in my mind that Indians encoded a lot into the calendar systems. See, today from science we know this. From science we know this Milankovitch cycles. There are 3 cycles. We know the amount of radiant energy we get from the sun. We know what are the periods during which we have a natural warming of the earth and a natural cooling down. We know periods of drought, periods of wetness, and all those things can be predicted. But these are not yearly phenomena. So these can be captured in certain ways. Indians always mark the seasons by the nakshatras. Based on the nakshatras, when a season would be called also. So there are some markers that we have over there that possibly give insight into many of these kinds of things. But I myself am not an expert in this, so I don't know.
So you mentioned about the 100 oar ships that were mentioned. I'm a naval architect, so I wanted to know. I have read it somewhere that those ships which were built during that time, although iron was available, the iron nails, they were generally stitched ships. In fact, we in the Navy are constructing one to sail it. So my question is that in your research, did you find that any of this naval architecture and the technology of building such big ships for those times, was it also transmitted to the nations where Indians sailed?
So I am trying to investigate the death of the shipping industry in India. It's the British who killed it. So prior to the British killing of the shipping industry, our Vaishyas had huge trading guilds. They were constructing all kinds of ships. Search for the name, if I'm not mistaken, it's called Solvyn, Solvyn. I might be mistaken, but Solvyn. That's a French guy, 1700s, who visited India and left artistic drawings of all the ships that he saw in many places. 1700s, India is not colonized yet fully, right? These are all Indian ships. He's showing Indian pleasure boats. He's showing Indian pleasure ships. He's showing Indian trading ships, huge multi-mast ships. Those are all the things in the Solvent. You may Google for that, you might find it. So, what he's saying is at that time, India had so many different kinds of ships. Then you might be familiar that 2 years back in the Republic Day, we gave this one of our awards, Republic Day awards, to a person called, I think, Mani Kafin. I forget the name. He's a Muslim guy from Lakshadweep. From Lakshadweep. Why? Because he retains a knowledge of shipbuilding as in ancient India. In his way, there's not a single nail used. Everything are joints made in a certain way, expanding out and then forming airtight kind of things. So without using a single nail, he could make ships. He was contracted by an Irish millionaire, multimillionaire, to build a ship that will go on the Indo-Roman trade route from Dubai to India. And he built it. I think he was given a Bharat Ratna, some other Republic Day award for that. But point is, he's perhaps one of the last persons in India who's got that knowledge still. I was intrigued when I saw Professor Ramaswamy's paper. He says underwater, this is a not natural, man made harbor. What kind of reason would be there for a man made harbor if not there was some kind of hopping from point to point using a boat or a ship? But that is not the punchline, right? Punchline is 18,000 years ago. 18,000 years ago, clearly there's no iron. Our oldest iron is in Gachibowli from 2200 BCE in Hyderabad. That is the oldest iron in India. Maybe the whole world also is the oldest iron. So 18,000 years ago, they were building ships or boats in India, southern India, that were going maybe hopping coast to coast and going and doing trading. They're clearly using coir to tie down things and some kind of technology, mortise and joints, right, where you expand out and do these things. There probably are works, but I have not read any manual as such that details how this building was done. But a starting point should be the solvent. He's listed to you the various kinds of ships and boats that were there in Calcutta, that were there in Tamil Nadu area. It shocked me when I saw that. The kind of pleasures that our ancient Indians used to, not in ancient, 17th century Indians had. You'd find it's like a complete house where the rich guy is celebrating on the first floor and the servants are all on the ground floor and the ship is taking them out just like our maybe the shikaras of Srinagar and things like that, but on a bigger scale. Things of that are there in Hooghly and other such places. But do take a look at that.
My question is to do with your last slide, where you concluded that, contrary to popular stereotype belief, that we know Europe only through colonial history, there's been millennia long interaction. Now, if this were acknowledged, then obviously the whole game changes. But they're not willing to listen.
No.
So, how do we arrive at a workable relationship with the West? I mean, personally, I wish to shut my eyes and ears to their existence and say, get out. I don't want to hear you because you've really destroyed our self-esteem and facts and history. How would you deal with the West, with Europe, which is not willing to listen and is insistent upon demonizing you and belittling you in ways that are really diabolical.
So I have addressed this, Madhuji, in this slide over here, in this slide which I show in all my talks. The reason is I want to empower our people into getting empowered over this narrative. If you see somebody saying that, if you see somebody saying that Indians are backward primitive, that is a framework that the colonials introduced. If you see somebody saying Brahminical people are evil, that is a statement coming from the missionaries. If you see somebody saying that Indians are so and so, you can make out the Eurocentric statement. If you see this oppressor oppressed kind of narrative coming, you know it is the Nehruvian socialism that's come over there. And similarly, Marxist narrative. So my goal is, if anybody reads NCRT or anything, you see something against Bharatiya civilization, you must be empowered to put them into a pigeonhole, saying you belong to this ideology. I know the problems and how your ideology has failed. Then you can start the next question. Why should I privilege your ideology? Your drishti is not the ultimate drishti, right? So I can say the person missing here is the Indic practitioner. The Indic practitioner does not have any adhikara to talk about their own civilization. The adhikara has been usurped by these forces, imposing their ideologies, leading to a subversion of our identity. That's what I emphasize over here. So, if any of us are empowered enough to read anything and immediately pigeonhole them, we are empowered. I'm no longer taking this nonsense. The minute you say that, I'll say, you belong to this thinking. And this missionary thinking, it came from this time when they thought God created the world 4004 BC, all that nonsense. I discredited that.
This is our state policy now.
Yes, I know.
So किसको discredit करें? ये सबसे बड़ा problem. If it was not state policy, then we could easily deal with that.
Right.
I think that really is the big tragedy of our time.
Very true, very true. I think that's where all of us have a role, including what I'm doing, creating awareness everywhere. So hopefully it'll become a tsunami where everybody starts demanding, why is this criminal distortion taught to our children? I keep telling people, right? Many people in NCRT editorial boards must be behind bars. If we care about our civilization identity, we would treat that crime so highly. Let me give an example. Last year or so, the Chinese government jailed some textbook writers because a certain picture was drawn in a wrong way in the school textbook. That is the amount of value they place on what they're teaching their children. Who cares over here? Clearly, nobody cares. But if somebody did care, we would jail all the people who are continuing this nonsense and indoctrinating so many millions and millions of Indian kids growing up deracinated, growing up without an identity and hating their Bharatiya identity and so on. This is a crime of massive proportions, if you ask me. So I think we just have to keep talking about it. Okay.
Actually, coming back to the gentleman's question regarding marking of time or record of time. He said, why is none of the scripts mentioning the local calendar of that time and age? Whatever texts which are there, how come they are not mentioning that particular time's calendar and a date of that calendar? That's number one. And number two, are there any cross references?
Wait. I don't think that's a correct assertion. There is a lot of epigraphy in India that is calling out an event or a date with respect to a certain era, Shaka era, Shakanta era, or Shalivahana era, or Buddha Nirvana era. There are many epigraphy in southern India, northern India that call out dates on these things. That's very much there.
So there must be some text which must be mentioning multiple calendars also?
Are there multiple calendars?
No, I mean, any text which mention multiple that according to this age and time, this is the date, but during our grandparents' time or ancestors' time, this was the date and age as per that time.
I don't think so. I recommend you read the works of Vedvir Arya. Vedvir Arya has studied a lot of discarded epigraphy. When the British were looking at the epigraphy of India, they found that they could not reconcile some epigraphy to what they had. So he studied all the discarded epigraphy. The Britishers had discarded some things they couldn't reconcile as forgeries. They said these are all forgeries. He studied that and said these are not forgeries. There were two calendar systems in India. We have mistook one for the other. And he shows there a 660-year difference between one calendar system to the other. And many dates that we have today are messed up because of the 660 years. That is his thesis. So do read Vedvir Arya for this.